Hello there, people, and welcome to another episode of Flight Chat, the listener feedback show for theflightcast.com. My name is Ray. Thank you so much for joining me. We are getting closer and closer to the release of Superman on July 11th, and really the start of what's going to be a fantastic July. Today, as a matter of fact, is the last day in June, and we got Jurassic World coming up this week. We've got Superman next week, and then we've got Fantastic Four First Steps at the end of July. So lots to get into, among other things as well. So without further ado, let's dive headfirst into this week's feedback. Starting, of course, with John R., who sent 3 emails this week. Just 3. But to be fair, last week it was a double dose. It was 2 weeks worth of emails with respect to, why last week's episode was as long as it was. But here we go. John R.'s first email for this week, titled, "Before the other side of this bridge you see, must first you answer my questions 3. Oh, okay, we're getting a little riddly here. All right, fair enough. He says, I have 3 questions this week, a couple of responses to last week, and perhaps my shortest scenario yet, since technically my 3rd question is a scenario. I'm really going to try and keep it to a minimum this time, he says. This will be my first of no more than 4 emails this week, and if there isn't a flight chat on the following weekend, I'll throw in just 1 extra, but then even if that's it, even if the show takes a 2-week hiatus or more, I'm turning over a new leaf, he says. No more than 5 emails, Pinky, I swear. Or Pinky swear, he says. Okay, all right, Pinky swear, Pinky promise, either way. All right, so here's his first question. He says, forgive me if this question is too morbid, but it is one that I'm very curious about, he says. How old is appropriate to be planning what happens to you post-mortem? My ex, when we were living in Florida at the age of 28, already made plans for her cremation. I thought that was a bit too soon. I think 55 is a good age since a lot of places consider that retirement age. Hey, I'll be 36 in less than 5 months, so I got 20 years to worry about that. How about you? Okay, this is a bit of a morbid question, but I have a definitive answer. And that answer is, there really isn't a too soon, to be honest with you. I've already determined that I will be cremated, and here's why. I'm claustrophobic, and under no circumstances will I be buried. No. I shan't be buried. Absolutely not. I will not be put in a coffin. I will not be lowered into the ground. No, sir. Absolutely not. Because my paranoid self believes in the absolutely... maybe it's seeing like Kill Bill or like Buried. Like this is where watching a lot of movies over the course of your life can like guard against you. Because your brain thinks of possibilities that like probably are not possible or likely. Like the idea of them putting you in that coffin and for whatever reason, you wake up. And now you're trapped, buried under concrete and ground and everything else in a locked coffin, and now that's how you live your last days. That's how you actually die. No, absolutely not. You will set my ass on fire. You will scatter my ashes or put them in an urn. I don't give a shit what you do. Just I will be ash when it is said and done. When they have a memorial, if I'm fortunate enough to have a memorial on that fateful day, which hopefully is many, 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 many years from now, because I do not intend to leave this earth any sooner than I should, and hopefully I don't, right? I'll knock on wood for that. But at that time, you will say goodbye to me, a picture. You'll see a picture of me. There will be there will be no body. There will be nothing no coffin, nothing like that. Urn, and you'll scatter my ashes across the Detroit River or something like that. Or send them into space, right? Like they did with Roddenberry, whatever it is. Just, no. I already know that. I don't think there's too early an age. It just depends on where you're at mentally. I will not be buried. I will be cremated. 1,000%. So, there we go. I was ready for that one, John. As morbid as that question might have been, I was ready for that one. That is something that I have thought about for a good long time, and I've also talked to Shonda about this. She agrees. She 100% agrees. We will not be buried. We will be cremated. All right, on to less morbid things. Question 2. He says, so I did try to tag Gunn on Threads and X. I'm guessing he uses the former more. I think he does. He even mentioned that in one of his interviews. I think either the Entertainment Weekly or the Rolling Stone interview, he talked about posting on Threads. He seems very active on Threads. But he says, I had a theory as to what his follow-up would be to Superman if it's not World's Finest, and it hit me. I think we're going to get a film none of us saw coming, well, except for me, maybe, LOL. A Superman and Supergirl team-up film. This makes the most sense as he has stated he wants to introduce the DCU Batman in Brave and the Bold, even though I am sure Batman will make a cameo in Clayface, especially if they're using Batman the Animated Series as an influence. What do you think about my theory? Well, recently when Gunn was talking to Brandon Davis, because, obviously they were right in the middle of their press tour for Superman. And Brandon Davis is one of the members of the press that did see the special screening that did happen. We can confirm this, people. I know there were people out there. Brooklyn Batman, one of our, he contributes to the feedback circle here and there. I think he listens to the show periodically. He's somebody, a mutual that I've had back from the old days of Twitter, before it turned into the South African Nazi plaything called X in that regard. He posted something about, be wary of spoilers because an alleged screening was happening. And another guy tried to call him out and say, no, the screening is fake. It's not happening. Well, it just so happened that particular day, Brandon Davis and a number of other influencers, also Soups, that one YouTuber that I'm like 50-50 on because I don't know. That guy always gives me a weird vibe. But either way, they all were at a special screening of Superman recently. So that has happened. That has absolutely occurred. We have people in the press and influencers that have 1000% objectively seen the new Superman movie. They have signed NDAs. They cannot comment. They cannot report, right? We can glean from some of the reactions and certainly from Brandon Davis, like, and him talking to James Gunn, how they feel about the movie. And of course, there is word, being passed around in hushed circles that, whether the movie is good or bad in that regard. But I bring this up because Brandon Davis apparently did ask James Gunn how long it was going to be before we saw Superman again. And Gunn's response initially was about 2 years. And then he recorrected and said, well, and he wanted clarification as whether or not he meant the next Superman movie or the next appearance of the character. And it sounds to me, James Gunn says, he said, you'll see the character before that. So James Gunn is seemingly confirming, should the DCU expand the way that he is planning and hoping, that we will see David Corenswet Superman sooner than his next solo film. He will appear in another film. Now, this does mean, and I think a lot of people are assuming, that this means he's going to be in Supergirl, which apparently just wrapped filming not too long ago. That would make sense, that he would be in Supergirl. I even heard somebody, I'll throw this theory out there because it's just a theory that I read, and this isn't coming from, this is somebody that has watched all the clips, and I have no patience, so of course I've watched all the clips. I shan't divulge what is in these clips. I will say that this person, based on a couple of clips that they've watched, specifically paying attention to Crypto, believes that Crypto is actually Kara's dog, and that Cal is watching Crypto for her, and at some point at the end of his movie, he's going to give Crypto back to her. Now, I don't know how true that is. It sounds like a very plausible theory, a very, very solid theory, but this does seem to lend like credence to the idea that, obviously Superman and Supergirl are going to talk to each other, going to interact with each other. Now, whether they get a full team up movie together or not, I don't know. I think personally, John, I think maybe focusing too much on the Kryptonians out of the gate. And don't get me wrong, the Superman fans, like, they've been waiting years for something like this because Superman has never really gotten this type of treatment out the gate with respect to the formation of a massive, what hopes to be a massive cinematic universe, right? Even in the case of the DCEU, like Man of Steel, like, whatever plans there were for Man of Steel 2, that's what morphed into BVS. And then, as far as another plan for a Man of Steel solo movie, well, Warner Brothers, kneecapped that pretty quickly. But this is an opportunity where we will get to see, potentially, Superman appearing in, making multiple appearances to start out the DCU. So I don't know if he'll get a full film of a team up with Supergirl. I think it's very likely he will appear in the Supergirl film. I do. I absolutely believe that's likely, and probably, if I had to venture a guess, they may have already shot those sequences between David Corenswet and Millie Alcock, since her movie is wrapping filming and is supposed to be released next year. But I don't know about the next, like, actual DCU film. I'm not certain about that. I know Clayface is on the docket, and yeah, it's going to be a minute before we see Brave and the Bold because they still have to cast a Batman, and they got to figure out what they're going to do with the Batman Epic Crime Saga, which this might be part of what your third question is going to be. It's going to involve that a little bit. But yeah, I don't think it's a bad theory. I just don't know if it's going to be a full film of team up with them. I think he'll appear in Supergirl. I don't know about a Supergirl and Superman team up film in that regard. But we'll just have to wait and see. We also have to remember that with respect to the evolution and the expansion of the DCU, that it is going to include television, right? We can't forget Peacemaker. We can't forget Lanterns, right? We can't forget the television influences, the television entries rather, that are going to be there, that are going to be a part of this. So like that's something to also take into account with respect to, what we're going to do or what we're going to see as far as the next DCU project after Superman in that regard, right? So here we go with respect to that. All right, so question 3 from John. He says, this might be too ambitious of an idea, but you know what? I guarantee this will make DC a lot of money. I'm probably going to tag Gunn about this once he figures out what to do about DCU Batman. Well, here's my only thing I will say about tagging before we get to your idea. Here's the other thing I will say about tagging James Gunn and like other creatives. And the reason that I don't do that personally is because they already have their ideas. And they already have their writers, they already have their creatives, they're already coming up with ideas. We don't need to like give them ours. And that's something this is and I remember like about a year or so ago, there was a editor who said, please do not send me your fan ideas because the second that I do, like I have to cut off communication. I can't do that because there's legalities and there's all sorts of other stuff going on. Like if you send them an idea that is yours, they can't talk to you at all, and there's no engagement. Like they have to suspend all communication with you because that could open them up to legal issues, and that could open them up to problems. Like say you both come up with the same idea, which absolutely can happen, and then you sent it to them and they went with it, and then you decide, hey, I'm going to try and they took my idea, I'm going to sue them, or anything like that. No, that's part of why I don't send any fan ideas, whether I have them or not, and I tend not to come up with them because I'm open to what the creatives are going to give us as far as a plan. But that's why I'm leery about tagging James Gunn or anybody else in any of your ideas with respect to what you want to do with DCU, across any of the mediums in that regard. So that's just my perspective, my opinions, just how I feel about it. It's part of why I don't do that. Plus, I also don't think myself, and I'm not saying that you're saying this, John, I'm not saying that you're expressing any arrogance yourself, but I don't think myself is arrogant enough to believe that, oh, my idea is what they should do. It's a no-brainer, da-da. Like I saw somebody the other day who posted, they said they don't understand why Paul Dini isn't already involved with Batman the Brave and the Bold. And basically intimating that because of Batman the Animated Series, because he's written Batman comics, that he should be in the room without question for Batman Brave and the Bold. And to me, I'd call bullshit on that, because what if that's not what James Gunn's plan is? What if that's not what the writer's room that's already come up with is? What if he's already decided to talk to Scott Snyder? Right? Because Paul Dini is hardly the only writer that's ever done Batman, right? Granted, he did the animated series, and it's phenomenal, it's incredible. Granted, he's written comics, but it depends on what direction James Gunn wants to go in. And quite frankly, for me, listen, as much as I love Paul Dini, as much as I love Batman the Animated Series, we've already got Cape Crusader out there, right? On Amazon, we know season 2 is coming. So, why do we need the live action DCU to reflect, what we see as far as Batman in that regard and that stylization? I don't think we need that. I don't. I want to see where James Gunn and his creative team takes us as far as the DCU is concerned. That's just my perspective. This is my feelings on it. That's because I truly believe 100% in creative freedom, even if I don't like it. Even if they end up doing something, making a decision, a choice that I do not agree with, I still applaud that creative freedom. I still believe in that creative freedom. It didn't matter to me that Taika Waititi took the Thor corner of the MCU in a different direction that I didn't care for. He still was allowed to do so, and I still champion that. That's what Marvel Studios hired him to do. He did it, and it has been successful, truthfully. So I will not knock it for that, right? Or if we all see Superman in another week or so, and there are decisions that James Gunn makes in the film that I do not agree with, or that I think are corny or cheesy, or that don't really sit well with me, I'm not going to be like, oh, well, what a horrible idea. He should have done this, should have done that. I'm just going to say, well, I didn't care for that. That part wasn't really my favorite, but you know what? I will still applaud and, champion his creative freedom to be able to do that, because whatever doesn't work for me doesn't mean it doesn't work for everybody. It means it could work for others in that regard. So that's how I feel about it, truthfully. But either way, let's get to your actual idea here in question 3. And your idea is Batman Crisis on Two Earths video game. He says, that's right, a multiverse game where the epic crime saga and DCU Batman team up and take on villains together, and everyone reprises their roles from the two films. There are so many things you can do with this. Maybe two Jokers team up, or two Clayfaces, or two Two-Faces. There's so much potential with this, he says. We're never going to get this in live action, so see, to me, this seems like the best idea. You get so many different scenarios, cutscenes, playable characters from both franchises. I think it would also clarify the confusion as to why two cinematic Batmen are going at the same time. I mean, is it doing things similar to No Way Home, he says? Sure, but the difference is Maguire and Garfield don't show up until the second half of the film. They team up early on, and there's a precedence for this happening thanks to Peacemaker's multiverse door. He says you can open the game with Pattinson Batman chasing down Keoghan Joker to an abandoned warehouse full of multiverse doors, just as the DCU Batman chases down the DCU Joker into a warehouse with doors too. Or Batmite, he says. Being the Batman fanboy, he is tired of waiting for the next Reeves Batman film to come out, and the next Brave and the Bold decides to mess with reality and have the two versions meet. Yeah, in his world, just like us, he perceives these realities as films. It would be funny to see his Batman collection in his dimension, including a funny Easter egg of the Schumacher cut of Batman Forever in Steelbook 4K or 5K, he says, with a laughing emoji. Does this sound like a good premise for a game, he asks. Technically, this could be canon. Batmite can always reset everything the way it was, with both versions not remembering what happened at the end once they're back in their respective worlds. Okay, is this a game that I would play, John? Sure. Do I think it's necessary? No, I don't. And the reason I don't think it's necessary is because I really believe, with every fiber of my being, that the two Batmen at the same time problem is a fan complaint. I do. I don't think the general audience cares whatsoever if there are two different Batmen happening at the same time. I don't. Because here's the deal. The reality of the situation is that in 2019, when Joker came out with Joaquin Phoenix, Jared Leto's Joker was still canon in the DCEU. And even though we didn't see Jared Leto like up close and personal up front, any fan, any DC fan, any movie fan that watched both Joker and Birds of Prey and the Fantabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn saw two different Jokers. You just saw him from the back. And she still referenced the Joker heavily, obviously, in her movie. And anybody out there that was like, well, is that Joaquin Phoenix's Joker? Well, how many people were really asking that question? And how did it really affect the films? I mean, Joker made $1 billion. Birds of Prey and the Fantabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn got kneecapped by the pandemic. It wasn't terribly well marketed from the get-go. There were tons of other issues beyond confusion. Anybody that wants to, I'm not saying you're saying this, John, but anybody that wants to say, well, clearly people didn't go see it because they were confused about who the Joker actually was, bullshit. I don't buy that whatsoever. So I really don't buy this idea that the general audience is going to be so whacked out, confused. Like, I don't believe, why are there two different Batman? No, I think they'll understand. I do. Because we've seen multiple incarnations. I mean, there have been so many Batman actors, right? Nobody's sitting there really worrying whether or not Keaton is the same as Kilmer and Clooney, or whether they're the same as Bale, or whether they're the same as Affleck, or whether they're the same as Pattinson. I think everybody can pretty much delineate, if they even care about differences, what the differences are between them all. And it's all about how you incorporate them into the universe. When the DCU Batman is incorporated, he's going to interact with Corn Sweat Superman. He's going to interact with Clayface and the other characters that are in the DCU proper. So that's where that connection is going to be. And he's going to look different. He's going to sound different. He's going to be in a different world in that regard, right? There's going to be enough of a physical and thematic difference, tonal difference between whoever the DCU Batman ends up being and Robert Pattinson's version of the Batman Epic Crime Saga. So the idea that we need to combine them, it's not necessary. I don't believe so. I think the only people that are worried about this, truthfully, and again, I'm not trying to assign any type of fan behavior to you, John. I'm just saying that I think the only people that worry about whether or not people will be confused at two cinematic Batman at the same time are fans. Fans that already know what the difference is and they think the general audience is stupid. And here's the problem with that. You can believe that the general audience is stupid all you like. I mean, it's insulting, but you can believe that all you like. But the fact of the matter is the general audience could not care less about connectivity and continuity and all of this and confusion like we do. They don't. They do not care. They never have. They never will. You give them a Batman movie that will entertain them, they'll go see it. You give them a Superman movie that will entertain them, they will go see it. They don't care whether they're connected or not. So I don't think this is necessary. Again, would I play this game? Most certainly I would. Do I think it's necessary for them to make? Do I think it would clear up confusion? No, because I don't think the confusion is going to be that big. I seriously doubt that. That doesn't mean that nobody's going to be confused. I'm sure somebody will be, but to the point where it causes the DCU or the Batman Epic Crime Saga a great deal of problems, no. You will never convince me that it's going to be that big of a problem because the general audience simply does not care. Imagine what's going to happen next year. And they've already announced this. They already made it clear at Hall H. But imagine what happens when a casual who's not paying attention to any of the behind the scenes stuff or any of the Hall H stuff with Avengers Doomsday. Imagine what happens when Robert Downey Jr. shows up as not Tony Stark, but as Doctor Doom. Now, if Marvel Studios isn't worried about that type of confusion with the general audience, then why are we worried about confusion between two different cinematic Batmen at the same time? We should not be, as far as I'm concerned. I get where it comes from, and I get why the concern about the confusion is there, but the general audience simply does not care as much as we do, period. So no, I don't think that this clearing up of confusion is necessary. Again, I would play this game. If they decided to make this game, that would be cool. But whatever plans James Gunn and DC Studios has for all of this, I'm willing to, let them do it, give them the benefit of the doubt, and let them, flex their creative muscles in that regard. If they decide that they want to do this, okay, cool. But I don't think it's necessary. I really don't. I don't believe this particular scenario is necessary at all. So that is as much as I have to say with respect to that particular question. All right, now let's get into the longer portion of John's first email, which is responses to last week, he says. He says, I forgot who it was who asked about horror, but was it Sam? I think it might have been Sam. He says, but here's my own perspective as to whether or not, no, it was Amr. Well, was it Amr? I think so. Amr, that's right. Amr, I think, was the one asking about horror movies because he wasn't certain about which ones, like how to react. Because he doesn't do jump scares, and the jump scares don't affect him like that. But John says, I have my own perspective as to whether or not horror scares me. If it's existential, then yeah, it can scare me. Hereditary is one that comes to mind, he says. That ending freaks me the hell out to this day. I haven't seen Hereditary. It's on my list, though. But yeah, I'm not really scared of most horror films, he says. Sometimes in a first viewing, I get scared. Like, I saw Scream when I was 10, and I thought the deaths were pretty realistic. I had to make sure my windows and doors were locked at night. But I watched it again as I got older, and it wasn't as scary. Hellraiser was scary at first with just how far they take things inappropriately, but again, second viewing, not as scary, he says. Hereditary, I would not watch again. There are far too many creepy things that happen in that film where I'm bowing out as if I'm someone's house for Halloween. If I'm at someone's house for Halloween. All right. He says, I really agree with what you said not too long ago. If you don't have anything nice, don't say anything at all. Sometimes silence is golden. Also, your responses to the anti-DCEU gatekeepers last week was very hilarious. Sometimes I listen to your show in order to help me fall asleep, and what you said about Phantom Strider and Ian, the completely unnecessary person, made me laugh so hard. I had to think of some other people who said outlandish things about DC. I'm now curious to see what your take on them is. You know what the best part about that is, John? I don't even remember what I said. I was mad for that moment, and I got it all out in that particular episode, and then I just moved on. Seriously, that is the power of, moving on and maturing and actually, not letting this shit eat you alive is I don't even remember who... Now, back in the old days of Twitter, like Alicia Grosso and Priscilla Page and, Lindsay Ellis and all those people, I remember... and yes, those are names that I still remember, but it's that was... back in, that's for nostalgic purposes to be I remember when this was this case and that was that case and whatever. But as far as anybody saying anything now, especially somebody that I've never heard of, it's whatever. Just, I will, attack it now and I will, trash it here and then I will just move forward because they don't deserve any more of my attention. And, that's a perspective that took me a long time to get to. And, I still struggle with it at times. I'm a human being, but I'm a lot better with it now than I was before. And anybody that has followed me on social media in the last 9 years or so, I'm telling the truth. I'm a lot different now on Threads than I was back in the days of Twitter in that regard. My goodness. Some of you remember, I know some of you remember, some of you listening remember the arguments that I got into on Twitter. Just the pissing contests with, which probably were more than likely trolls and bots at that time too. And now I think more of us are clued in and have caught on to the grift and the rage baiting and all that shit. So, yeah, I hear you on that. Glad that I can entertain with respect to my reactions to it. He says, I listened to a YouTube video a couple of weeks ago. Oh, he's got some examples. All right, here are his examples. Okay. He says, I listened to a YouTube video of a couple of weeks ago. called Two Men Fighting Over Man of Steel on a channel called Hack the Movies. The guy in the video, Tony, was once associated with James Rolfe, the angry video game nerd who I've mentioned in the past. Oh, yes, I'm aware of him. I was curious to see a civilized debate, but that's not what I got, he says. I had to speed the video up because there was no way I was going to listen to what I listened to for 3 hours. It was pretty one-sided. All he did was pick a friend who liked Man of Steel but didn't really have a strong defense of the film. It was pretty one-sided. All Tony did for 3 hours was nitpick the holy crap out of the film, claim Snyder stole visual cues from Transformers, made the assumption Superman was bad at his job, and didn't really say anything of substance that I haven't heard a million times from these dumbass anti-Snyder cultists. I blocked his ass on YouTube. I don't need to listen to these snobbish gatekeepers anymore. The title was clickbait, and I fell for it hook, line, and sinker. And that's the thing, John, is they design clickbait to be exactly like that. They design it to be attractive. They design it to be, hey, you know what? Come see this rational debate, and then it turns into a 3-hour pissing contest. You know, just them whining pathetically like crybabies about the existence of this film because they're so mad that it didn't do what they wanted them to do. It's pathetic. And it's lowest common denominator, and it's all that they have, right? Where this guy is, Tony, the two men fighting over Man of Steel. I mean, just the title of that video, at least for me, it's like, why do I give a shit about anybody fighting over Man of Steel? Like, if you want to have that pissing contest, and what's worse is, like, this is a tactic that is used in sports talk radio and talk radio in general, is whoever hosts a show and they've got, like, really opinionated hot takes meant to stoke the fire of the audience, here's what they'll do. They'll screen calls, right? Because they take callers. They're call-in shows. But their call screeners will screen the calls to make certain that the craziest, most unhinged, cultish-like people will call in, because the whole idea is that they get to make fun of them, and then they get to soundbite and clip, you know, whatever silly things they say to post on their show later on, you know, as part of a bit, right? It's all in service to their ratings, and it's all in service to the entertainment factor. They're not interested in rational discussion. They're not interested in that at all. They just want a sideshow. They just want to be all manner of inflammatory because that's what gets the attention. That's what gets the eyeballs. That's what gets the clicks in that regard. So, yeah, it is clickbait. It is lowest common. There's nothing thoughtful or, you know, even remotely introspective about it whatsoever. It's just a pissing contest. And that's what a lot of YouTube is. Pissing contests and people just appealing to the lowest common denominator of angst because they know that misery and misanthropy is a selling point. Hate marketing sells, sadly, because people love to hate shit because it's easier to hate things than it is to actually enjoy things without being a skeptical piece of shit about it. So, yeah, that's what that is. And those are my thoughts with respect to that. Now, how about these other examples you've got? He says Leon Thomas, the Renegade Cut, once made a video series called DCEU Film and Culture where he would debunk a lot of the pro-DCEU defenses. He reminds me of Mr. Rathburn from the show Arthur, which is a show that's a little above your age when that came out, but in that show, Mr. Rathburn was Arthur's teacher that liked to demoralize or belittle his students. I didn't watch Arthur like religiously like my sister did, but I am aware of Arthur. But he says Leon doesn't talk movies as much anymore as he's mostly moved on to religion and politics. Oh, I see. So basically, when he was done being a dick to everybody about their opinions on the DCEU, he decided to move to more explosive matters like religion and politics. Sounds to me like he's a red hat. And maybe I'm wrong, I don't know, but debunking, like making a video series where you're debunking other people's opinions on a movie series that you don't agree with. Like, what is that? Like, why? Why waste your time and energy? Again, it's because hate marketing sells. It's because being a hate monger sells on YouTube, unfortunately. He was probably getting a decent amount of attention before he decided to move on to religion and politics. And I don't know what he's saying in that regard, but that's definitely an explosive set of topics to talk about now that may get you an audience, maybe not the audience that you deserve. And hey, if somebody wishes to clarify what his political stance is, sure. I mean, probably won't surprise me one way or the other because there are plenty of people that aren't red hats that, you know, seem to think that anybody that is a fan of the DCEU is a red hat, which is like, that just fries me, the laziness that is inherent behind that. But yeah, another waste of space, another waste of time to create a video series where you're debunking pro-DCEU defenses. Like, why? Like, it just, what, you can't allow people to like it? You can't allow people to like franchise. Like, that'd be like me making a series like, called MCU Film and Culture, where I debunk a lot of the pro MCU defenses, right? Well, no, it's not the same, Ray, because the MCU was actually popular. I will refer to you again to those first four films in the DCEU that made $3 billion. The DCEU was popular until Warner Brothers shot it in the foot, shot themselves in the foot, and kneecapped it, is what I should say in that regard. So, whatever. It's just a waste of time to make a film series debunking everybody else's positive opinions toward a film. That's pretty disgusting, honestly. So this last one, Kaiser Neko. Oh, great. Kaiser? Really? Someone that puts Kaiser in the title? Okay. Kaiser Neko. Scott from Team 4 Star Dragon Ball Z Abridged. I met Scott one time, he says. I honestly forgot who he was, even though I watched his show, but I know he was super mean to Zack. He said the line Wonder Woman said in Zack Snyder's Justice League, "You can be whatever you want to be," to the princess, wasn't earned because Snyder's perception of DC characters is nihilism, joylessness, and not understanding of the characters. But while I enjoy his work, I've learned not to care about his opinions. He has some yes men on board. Groupthink, if you will. But Nick, aka Lanipater, has a wider strike zone, so I'm okay when he doesn't like something. Okay, so here's the thing. Were those his words, John? He said Snyder's perception of DC characters is nihilism, joylessness, and not understanding of the characters. Okay, before I make this statement, why don't we just go ahead and define what nihilism is? Because I'm pretty sure that this idiot doesn't know what nihilism actually is, right? So if we look up if I Google this, if I Google the definition of nihilism is the rejection of all religious and moral principles in the belief that life is meaningless. Okay. You tell me where life is meaningless to Superman, who legitimately snaps Zod's neck to save the lives of humans after he's been saving the lives of humans as Clark Kent and Superman the entire movie. Let's see, where's the rejection, where's the belief that life is meaningless and the rejection of moral principles in that? How about Batman, right? The whole reason that Batman wants to take out Superman is because he could bring the whole world down. He believes he's saving lives by taking out Superman because he saw what happened on Black Zero. He saw that little girl who lost her mother, right, when one of the buildings was taken out. And after one of his employees, Jack, was, destroyed in the building that collapsed, the Wayne Tower building that Zod eyeballed with the heat vision, and also the other dude, the security guard or whatnot, whose legs got taken out, right? But Bruce Wayne and Batman, he doesn't believe life is meaningless, right? All those people, doesn't matter. He's not saving lives, right? What the hell? And then Wonder Woman, really? Did he watch the Wonder Woman film? If you watched Wonder Woman and you believe that she thinks life is meaningless, wow, you need mental help. You need to go see a doctor. You might need to be committed in that regard, because that's insane. Absolutely insane. How on earth anybody can watch the DCEU and believe that DC characters don't care about life and are completely joyless? Like, what? No. Absolutely makes no sense whatsoever. And even going past, like, if you continue down the Snyder trilogy path and you go into Zack Snyder's Justice League, where is the nihilism and the joylessness in that grouping? Are you kidding me? Their whole point is they're trying to save lives. All of them are trying to save lives. That's literally what any of them have been doing from the beginning. How about the joy that Cyborg gave that the one woman, the waitress, who was down on her luck, was getting evicted, key wouldn't work in the lock, had 2 kids, right? And he gives her the money in the bank account. How about that? And you saw the joy that he experienced, the smile on his face, the smirk that he got when her entire life was changed in that regard, right? Joylessness? Nihilism? Okay, anyone who believes that, anybody who believes that, is either saying it for effect or they're an idiot. And they literally need mental help. If they saw those movies and believe that it's all about nihilism, joylessness, and not understanding the characters, that is some grade A butt hurt. And that goes for him and anybody else that's on his groupthink panel, right? All yes men, all automatons, all probably red hats too, more than likely. But that's just my assumption. I could be wrong. But to me, when you're willing to be that stupid, when you're willing to be that delusional, when you're willing to ignore what's in your face because it doesn't look as bright as you want it to be, because it's not as saccharine and as soft as you want it to be, like, that's ridiculous. It's utterly ridiculous that you would condemn an entire franchise because it's not exactly what you want it to be, and then you lie about it, right? You will twist your own subjective perception to believe that it's this. It's just like the people who tell me that Superman didn't care about life because he snapped Zod's neck. He literally did it to save a human family. You said he was crying out because he was upset that it was the loss of the last of the people from his planet. Yeah, he didn't want to have to kill him. He didn't want to have to resort to killing, but he was going to do so to save the family's life. People love twisting these, what they see into their own deluded arguments, and I mean, it's certifiable. It seriously is. A lot of these people like need some serious professional help. Like if they believe these takes, if they're just being performative for the sake of rage bait and trying to get people like me pissed off, well, unfortunately, they're doing a good job in that regard. I will never watch this person's channel. Where this, I've never even heard of this individual, and they certainly will not get any of my attention in that regard. But man, just that's ridiculous, utterly ridiculous, and delusional for him and his yes men to even remotely suggest that nihilism, joylessness, and not understanding the characters. I mean, and the arrogance to be able to say that. I mean, you got to have like a set of brass balls on you to actually believe that, to actually say that, to actually think that there's anything rational about what has come out of your toxic ass mouth in that regard. That is, man. All right. Well, you picked three winners as far as your examples. I mean, they're all terrible. They're all horrible people, and it's unfortunate. It's very unfortunate that those are the ones that get millions of followers. Those are the ones that get monetized. Those are the ones that get all the success because they get all the attention. Because it's so much easier to be a hateful piece of shit than it is to be a kind, positive individual, right? That's how I know that even if I started doing stuff on YouTube and TikTok more often, like if I started doing the videos like I used to, if I did videos more often, like if I did my own stuff like Dave the Film Junkie does, I know I'd never make it big because I'm too positive. Seriously, I'm too positive. Like I am too rational for that. I don't hate monger. I'd never get a massive following, right? It's just like how Cinema Sins has over 8 million subscribers and Cinema Wins has over 1 million subscribers. People love being negative pieces of shit and they love following negative pieces of shit, and that's unfortunate. It's more of an indictment on the world that we live in than anything else, to be honest with you. But it is what it is, unfortunately. We try, John, and we try to be as positive as we can with respect to movies, TV, and other assorted media. But continuing on, all right, now on to the scenario that he has for this week. Like he said, it's short. He says, basically, I had this idea about what the Harry Potter show reboot can do, something that the books or films haven't touched upon. He says, usually these days, modern 50 to 60-minute shows, for padding, they would have flashbacks. He says, I figured a scenario like this would have happened in the Dursleys' household when Harry and Dudley were in kindergarten. I know this is mean, but compared to other things that family has done to him, it's pretty tame. Love to hear your thoughts. If you want to try a British accent, you can, but it's optional. Nope, won't be doing that. But apparently it's dialogue. Harry, wiping his tears, says, Dudley hit me. And Vernon, not looking up from his paper, says, and was there a particular reason Dudley hit you? And Harry says, no, I was just sitting here. And Dudley, smirking, goes, he was in my spot. I told him I wanted to watch Dino Derby. Vernon, folding the paper with a grunt, says, well, there we are then. You were in Dudley's seat. If you don't want to be hit, don't provoke him. It's simple, really. Petunia from the kitchen says, would you like another chocolate, Diddykins? And Dudley, grinning, says, two, please. Harry quietly says, I didn't even know it was his spot. Vernon, glaring, says, don't talk back, boy. Okay, like, so I guess I'm kind of lost on what is different about this scenario than what the Dursleys actually did, but that I could also chalk that up to, I mean, like, I'm not like a massive Harry Potter fan. I've seen all of the movies, but I have not seen them enough to be like, oh, well, I know this and I know that. If I talk to my sister Rachel, who is a huge Harry Potter fan, she would probably be able to discern exactly what is different about your scenario than what the Dursleys actually did in the movies, but I unfortunately cannot discern precisely what is different in that regard. Or maybe there's more to it and the whole image didn't come through. I'm not 100% certain, John, but either way, thank you for sharing. Maybe further clarification, I can figure it out. But at the moment, unfortunately, I'm sorry, I don't know what is quite different about this particular scenario. But either way, let's get to John's second email, which is titled Wanted to Share Some Thoughts. And he's got three parts to this. So part one, he says, lately I've been thinking about the Beatles song In My Life because it's a song that resonates with a lot of people and applies to others and not just Lennon. I guess I'm getting a little personal, but I'm integrating a sort of media music into it. Singing the lyrics is optional. Nope, not going to sing. But he says, there are places I remember. All my life, though, some have changed, some forever, not for better. Some have gone and some remain. All these places have their moments. All right. Sometimes I occasionally visit my old apartment complex in Santa Rosa that I grew up in, he says, where I had childhood friends and a loving family, as well as the house we moved into down the street where I had dogs and cats and other animals that I had grown fond of. A family friend that I lived with shared a post of my late cat Merlin drinking from a bath faucet. He had a tendency to do. He had reminded me that Merlin has now passed a decade ago. June seems to be a tough month because sometimes my cat Charles passed in 2019. Uh, I would also visit places I lived in, Hayward and Richmond, among other places, occasionally dropping by old spots. With lovers and friends I can still recall, some are dead and some are living. In my life, I've loved them all. That's more of the song he's quoting. And then he says, some friends, including a few I've been close to, passed away. July 1st would have been my best friend Donnie's 35th birthday. He died from a drug overdose at 21. My God, that's awful. Last year, two friends passed. Rob was always fun to be around. We had been fans of anime and wrestling. He had health problems and died at 39. Oh, my goodness. A schoolmate, Jason, never quite took a liking to me, he says. Eventually, he did grow indifferent as we had hung out with our gang after the high school years. His gravestone has a Batman emblem on it that I thought was pretty cool. He's buried near my grandparents, who I still lament over, among other family members that passed. Some were of ripe old age, and some where I felt not quite as old as they should have been. Then he says, after things with Laura ended, I checked in on previous relationships and they all seem to be doing fine. My ex, Brittany, interestingly enough, is married now and moved from California to Michigan. I doubt you guys know each other. It's a big state, not as big as you might think. But he says, sometimes I worry about Laura and I appreciate Tammy giving me a year to get over her. She had a hard life and I feel guilty for not giving her a better life, which gets me to the next lyric, which is, but of all these friends and lovers, there is no one who compares with you, and these memories lose their meaning when I think of love as something new. Though I know I'll never lose affection for people and things that went before, I know I'll often stop and think about them. In my life, I love you more. He says, call me sentimental, but it seems this particular song's existence is the soundtrack of my life at the moment. The person in question that I love more is Tammy. It has to be she sacrificed so much for me. Fought for me every day. She's never been confrontational with me. She cares about my feelings. I don't know if she'll hear this. I'm reluctant to share Flight Chat episodes with my friends and family because they might not get the inside baseball stuff with Marvel, DC, Star Trek, etc. But I have been more open to sharing the show with her, maybe as a means for her to understand my personality and interests more. Your show does seem to have a way to bring people together. Whether it's Anthony sharing his family life with everyone, Wally you sharing his personal life stories, this is a safe space, as you said in the past. It does feel like a safe space. We've all checked in on each other in some form or another. I'm happy to have met Tammy. The in my life I love you more part, I believe that applies to her. Perhaps it's a cliched song at this point, he says. I know it's used in weddings, funerals, birthdays, but that song has just turned 60. It's incredible how music like that can be so timeless. Does that song hold any special meaning to you, Ray, or other listeners? Is there another particular song that has sentimental value to you? Love to hear your thoughts. I won't say that In My Life has great sentimental value to me, only because it's not one of the top Beatles songs that I've necessarily listened to a ton. If we're talking Beatles and if we're talking sentimental value, I've always been partial to Paperback Writer. With me being a writer, that one speaks to me a lot with respect to like the writing process and just kind of, I mean, in a more superficial sense, what writers are kind of like and how they feel in that regard. Another one that seems kind of silly, but I being a sleep deprived individual, I am partial to I'm Only Sleeping because there's something about those lyrics. Please don't wake me, no, don't shake me, leave me where I am. I'm only sleeping. Uh, or please don't spoil my day. I'm miles away, and after all, I'm only sleeping. Like that one, I dig that one. I dig that one a lot. Just off the top of my head, just a couple of Beatles tunes that I am partial to. I mean, there's tons of others, truthfully. Um, as far as like emotional attachment, nothing necessarily personal that necessarily describes my life in that regard. I will say that as far as music goes, a lot more. I am far more into instrumental music than I am to vocal music. It's not that I'm not into vocal music, but instrumental music. So like a lot of jazz. Like there's a ton of jazz that does speak to me and like has a lot of emotional depth for me just because of the sound and just because of like there's a song by Weather Report that I've been listening to a lot over the last year called Nubian Sundance, and it's from one of their albums. I think it's Mysterious Traveler, I think, or maybe I'm thinking of a different album. Let me see if I can look that up real quick. But Weather Report was a fusion jazz band that, from the 70s, during the fusion era of jazz. Oh, it is Mysterious Traveler. I was right. Cool. Awesome. 1974. Um that song, like, just it's this really awesome, like, 10-minute long sound portrait that, like, has a bunch of different peaks and valleys. And I've always dug the title, and for obvious reasons, Nubian Sundance, right? And just the vibrant energy and the nature. And it sounds like it's been done for a live audience, because there's, like, audience cheering, like, in the background at the beginning and end of it. Like, I don't know, that's just, sometimes that's just a really, like, a strong upbeat type of tune for me to listen to. And stuff like that I gravitate towards, right? Or just stuff that, like, puts me in a particular mode. Like, if I'm driving, or if I'm at the gym, like, a lot of times I listen to the gym, I have a playlist at the gym that is all electronic music. And it's all of, like, my favorite electronic tracks from, like, Crystal Method, Chemical Brothers, Prodigy. And, like, I'll have stuff like, Trip Like I Do from Crystal Method, or Vapor Trail, uh, Chemical Brothers. Oh, that's Block Rockin' Beats. Anything from Dig Your Own Hole. That's probably that, and, like, Surrender are probably my two favorite Chemical Brothers albums. Although Come With Us is a really good Chemical Brothers album. I really like that one too, for anybody who digs the Chemical Brothers. And then Prodigy, that's probably Fat of the Land. Fat of the Land, that's, with the inappropriately titled Smack My Bitch Up, Breathe, Diesel Power, which Diesel Power is cool because recently, a couple of years ago, they used that in an episode of The Flash. And when I heard the intro, like, I was like, wait a minute, this sounds like Diesel Power. And then, sure enough, it was a fight sequence with Barry, and I forget who he was fighting, but I was, like, jacked up. I was like, wow, they're using Prodigy. All right, they went back to the well for this. So, like, that's an awesome album. Also, the oh dang it, what is it called? Music for the Jilted Generation. That's right, because I got into electronic music watching the movie Hackers, and Voodoo People and One Love are two tracks from that album, that Prodigy album, Music for the Jilted Generation, that are on the Hackers soundtrack. And so I obviously, like, got into that 1995. Yeah, 95, 96 is when I got into electronic music. It was through that movie. And there were so many different artists on that album, and that was how I discovered them, and that was how I discovered the electronica genre in that regard. That, plus also seeing the music video for Block Rockin' Beats at, like, 5 in the morning, before getting ready to go to school, on MTV, back when MTV was purely music videos most of the time. Maybe Real World and Kurt Loder and stuff here and there, but yeah. So anyway, I'm more of an instrumental music person, but I'm sure if I thought harder about it, I'd probably find some lyrical songs that do speak to me. Like I said, and I mentioned some of the Beatles ones as well, for sure. But that's cool. Thank you for a bit of the personal glimpse into there. Yeah, I do like to think this is a safe space, right? We talk about movies, TV, and other sort of media, but if there's anything else that you guys want to share, yeah, I don't want to close off. I don't want to close that off. Within reason, of course. I mean, obviously, like, really deeply personal details and, like, stuff that may or may not be appropriate for the audience, that's a little bit different. But I don't think we've necessarily crossed that bridge just yet with any of what you guys have shared in that regard. So certainly appreciate it all. No doubt about it. All right, part two. He says, okay, and now for something completely different. Gotta keep the Monty Python references coming, lol. He says, it does kind of feel like a full circle moment. The four Warner Brothers formed a studio in the 1920s to make movies appreciated in a new, meaningful way, just as two brothers not too far away from them sought to make animation a serious art. And now we have James Gunn, who was supported by his own brothers and I think a cousin, to help make his vision come to life. That has to be a beautiful thing, right? Comic books have a way of bringing people together. Whether it be intrigued by the gritty Elseworld and indie titles that inspired Snyder's work, or the runs of many comic creators that Gunn aspires to. This is why there's not a single ounce of hate in my bones for either of these two men. There is no right way to read a comic book, no matter what anyone tells me. These characters are like clay, he says, and not just clay face, but metaphorically speaking. You can mold them into any shape or form you see fit. There are only so many ways you can tell a character story so many times. To anyone listening to this show, I don't know if Brent listens, I understand where you are coming from with the Snyderverse. I do. I also think it's better to be rational than irrational, because Man of Steel was the result of trying to be different from the Superman created by Richard Donner, Mario Puzo, Bruce Timm, and Paul Dini. If Snyder and Nolan wanted to, they could have done Superman Returns Redux, but that's not what they set out to do. They set out to make a modern blockbuster Superman film for modern audiences. The problem is with modern audience is that they are fickle and fight and bicker over the littlest of things. Not the general audience. I would disagree with that. I think the fan audience fights and bickers over the littlest of things. But he says, and it's not lost on me, that Gunn is trying to overcome what Zack had to go through. They're birds of a feather and they flock together, and that's why I appreciate them displaying their respect towards one another. They've known each other for over 20 years, probably longer than many gatekeeping friends that celebrate hating on the Snyderverse, or one who celebrate hating the DCU, which hasn't even fully started yet. It's all background noise to me now. I'm not interested in what influencers say about a movie anymore. I'm my own person who thinks for themselves. They can F off. There are some I like and can appreciate their point of view, but I'm going to continue to diverge from groupthink and be an individual. I have disagreed with you in the past on movies and shows and all assorted media, but I still listen to you because I respect your opinion. Well, I appreciate that. That's the whole point of It's All Subjective, is we can agree to disagree. Agree or disagree in that regard, but it's all about being respectful and not being a complete asshole about it, right? Like, and that's all I've said to people for years is, look, we don't have to agree on things. Just don't be a dick, right? The people that I block on threads, it's not because they dislike the Snyderverse. I couldn't care less if they dislike the Snyderverse. What I don't like is when they trash it, is when they are overly negative, is when they are overly toxic about it, and also when they decide to, do this revisionist history thing and talk about, well, it's this and well, it's that, and lie, right? It's like I'm seeing this thing, why is the Snyder cult so angry just because they think 10 years wasn't enough? No, it has nothing to do with that. Has absolutely nothing to do with 10 years not being enough. It has everything to do with what Warner Brothers did in terms of the lies and the deceit, right? And how they changed things under the guise of, oh, Joss Whedon's just finishing what Zack started. No, you hired him to rewrite and redo the whole Justice League movie after Zack stepped down to deal with his daughter, like his family tragedy in that regard, right? Like that's, no, the lies and the deception, right? And then on top of that, being trashed for liking those incarnations of Superman and Batman, right? Like that's where it comes from, right? It was born out of toxicity, being attacked with toxicity from both studios and from the gatekeepers, and people acting like that's not why the cult was created, and also people acting like there is no cult surrounding the Donner films and anything with Christopher Reeve. Yeah, you're out to lunch, and we're not gonna lie. We're not going to shy away from the truth, right? We're not excusing either of these cults, but we most certainly are going to shine light on it in that regard. So, yeah, it has nothing to do with whether or not I disagree with people's opinions. It has everything to do with how much, how rude or not they wish to be about it, how toxic or not they wish to be about it. That's what will get you blocked. Rudeness and toxicity in that regard. So, all right, on to part 3. He says a genie grants you 3 wishes. What are those 3 wishes? And yes, one of those 3 wishes can be more wishes, but only 3 more. And he says, me, wish 1. I wish for the powers of Dr. Manhattan, but without looking like the Blue Man Group colliding with quantum science. Wish 2. I wish for all planets in the universe to be clean, energy efficient, affordable, peaceful, and healthy for all good living beings. Wish 3. I wish for 3 more wishes. And with that, he goes, wish 4. I wish for all people, animals, and creatures who were good or aspire to be good that died from every planet in the history of the universe to be guaranteed relaxation and happiness in the afterlife. Wish 5, I wish that diseases like AIDS and cancer would be eradicated. And wish 6, I wish for the genie to be free. Well, let's see. I think that 3 wishes off the top of my head without doing a ton of thinking. Wish 1 would be, I'd keep it at 3 wishes, number 1. But wish 1 for me, because if I remember correctly, in Aladdin, I believe Genie said, Ixnay on the wishing for more wishes. So I'm going to go by that logic in that regard. And I will say the first wish is for myself. I would say that I wish for me and my family to be completely comfortable and financially free. So that's number 1. Number 2, I wish for worldwide diversity, equity, and inclusion across all minority groups, right? That's what I would most certainly wish for, and I think that wishing for that, I think, would also encompass, not just socioeconomic, not just socially, but also economically in that regard. So I think financial status would be changed in that regard as well. So I'm trying to encompass all of it in that one wish, because diversity, equity, and inclusion is important, regardless of what the current regime in the White House would have you believe. And then my third wish would be for the genie to be free in that regard. I feel like those 3 things would make things the most equitable with respect to our time, because I feel like there's a lot of other stuff that we would get out of the diversity, equity, and inclusion, if that were truly honored and truly respected worldwide, I think there would be a lot of other advances that would happen in humanity that would put us in a much better place if that actually was like adhered to, if that actually was a thing, if it actually was truly existent on our planet in that regard. A time of no bigotry, no racism, and no intolerance in that regard. And yeah, and then as long as me and my family are completely financially free, and then the genie's freedom. Yep, those are my three wishes. I'll stick, like I said, I'll stick to just the three wishes in that regard. X-nay on the wishing for more wishes. All right, so one more email from John. It's called "You're a Good Man," Raymond Smith. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. He says, I'm really going to try to make an effort to not say things out of line. Sometimes when it comes to online discourse, it is difficult to know if I strike a nerve with people. If I did, I apologize, right? If you're talking about the political stuff, like that is a powder keg at this point in time. And yeah, there's right now, I would say the political discourse with respect to what's going on, especially in the United States of America, but even worldwide, but certainly in the U.S. Yeah, it's just really it's very volatile and very explosive at this point in time. More explosive than it ever has been in our lifetimes, I would say. Definitely right now. So that's all I would say is just with respect to your beliefs and certain things with that. That's all I say is tread lightly, and I would say that in general. I wouldn't just say that like to me. I would say that towards anybody that you might be trying to have these discussions with. I'm not saying don't have them because there are tough discussions that a lot of us do need to have. Just be wary of who you're having that discussion with and the type of tack that you take with respect to what it is your perspective on it is. Because I know you and I have definitely disagreed with a number of things in that milieu in the past. Stuff that we haven't even necessarily brought up on this show. Because this is not a heavily political show, but as I've said many times, I don't shy away from it when you guys bring it up, and I'm not going to shy away from it because it's important and it intersects with movies, TV, and other sort of media more than we like to give it credit. But either way, it's all good. It is all good, sir. He says, I'm planning a trip to Michigan in the next 2 years. I know quite a few people up there. Always felt bad that I never got a chance to see them. If I ever do, I hope we can meet up. Maybe we'll get to watch the Batman Part 2 together. It'll probably be out by then, lol. Probably, possibly. It all depends, in that regard. And, things change so much over the course of years. Michigan is not a small state. You're right. It's not, but it's also not quite that big if we're talking about population centers, right? Like it's more densely populated in the southeastern lower corner than it is like anywhere else. I mean, I know there's people in Grand Rapids and Muskegon. I know there's definitely people up north, but it changes, and who knows what'll happen over the next couple of years in terms of where it changes. Truthfully, bringing some of the social political stuff back into play, Michigan, as currently constructed, could be one of the better states to be in, depending on how things go. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how that goes. But either way, we'll see what happens in the next couple of years, huh? He says, do you remember the most miserable experience you had at a theater? Not the movie itself, but the theatrical experience. A creaky chair, noisy fans. You can include the fans shitting on BVS during Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 showing, or the It Has to Be Better Than Leto Joker trailer, but were there others? He says, okay, I never shared this on the show, but since 2014, I've had gout attacks at least 7 times. Oh no, gout. Oh, I've known some people that have had gout. That gout does not sound like even remotely fun whatsoever. It sounds awful, very painful. He says, in 2019, I went and saw Dragon Ball Super Broly with my best friend Nick, and I was in excruciating pain, but I didn't want to let him know. I had already seen the Japanese sub a month prior, and this was the dub, so it wasn't like I missed out on the plot. Well, that absolutely, I have nothing to top that. I have absolutely nothing to top that particular experience. But let's see. As far as, so you're saying not the movie itself, right? Like, so, my situation where I left Dreamcatcher and Killing Them Softly early, that doesn't count because that's about the movie. Okay, I understand the parameters. I would say next to that, there was a scenario, Shonda and I, when we went to see Ant-Man the first time out, the first Ant-Man at the IMAX theater that we don't go to anymore. There was a kid kicking my chair. There was absolutely a kid randomly kicking my chair throughout the whole time, and that's where, like, I have my back row logic, but there were a couple of times early on in our dating that we didn't always adhere to back row because she didn't always want to sit in the back row, and then I kind of just like overruled that, like, going forward. I said, no, we will not have people sitting behind us. It's not going to happen. Now, fortunately, because this was back when recliners weren't a thing in theaters. Now that recliners are a thing in theaters, that's not a concern. That's absolutely not a concern at all. A kid kicking the back of your chair, because even if we weren't sitting in the back row, which we still are, but even if we weren't, there's no way that a kid's kicking the back of your chair unless they're standing there, like the aisles are too big, right? You can fully recline in these chairs, and there's more than enough room for whole families to walk through without you having to move. That's how awesome these reclining theaters are, and why I prefer them more often than not, and why I go to Imagine Cinemas more than any other theater chain in that regard, especially up here. It's regional, but who gives a shit? Anyway, yeah, kid kicking my chair in Ant-Man. I'll go ahead and say that that was miserable. I tried as best as I could not to let it ruin my movie. You know what? The other one, actually, this one probably was worse. But I told this story because I reviewed Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes that came out last year. That one was shitty. I'm not going back to that theater ever again, because it wasn't just that a couple sat in my seats that I had bought and he was not interested in moving at all because the theater wasn't sold out. And it's like, I don't give a shit. Like, you are still sitting in my seat, but since the theater was already not even remotely full, I said, just screw it. I'm not going to pick a fight. Let me just sit somewhere else, even though I really wanted to pick a fight with this dude, but I decided not to. Just wanted to see the movie. And then the movie, what was it, like more than halfway through, lights come on, right? Lights randomly come on and ruin our ability to see the movie properly for about 10, 15 minutes. And then they don't even stop the movie. They come in during the movie and announce that anybody that was upset by it, anybody that was bothered by it, can come get free passes. And I'm like, you didn't even pause the movie. The movie's still going. So now we're missing shit in the movie because you want to apologize for the lights accidentally coming on. It was stupid. It was ridiculous. It was cheap. That theater has gone downhill and I'm not going back. So yeah, that was worse. That was worse than the kid kicking my chair. It was also worse than the 3D glasses not working properly at the beginning of Godzilla X Kong, which was at a different Imagine. Now that was at an Imagine theater, a one that I don't go to very often in Royal Oak, and haven't been back there since that time. I've seen a handful of movies there, but yeah, that was the first 10 minutes, and that was another case where we had moved. Like, we had gotten up out of our seats, and when we went back, there were people sitting in our seats when we came back, and it's like, what the people? Do you not pay attention when you buy tickets? Like, your seats are numbered. Sit where the hell you bought your ticket at, right? Like, don't sit somewhere else, right? Doesn't matter. What if we've been late? It's frustrating to deal with assholes like that. And I really hope that I don't have to deal with that for Superman on July 8th, because that theater is, mostly sold out, mostly sold through. I haven't checked to see. In fact, here, let me just do another check with respect to why is my phone not behaving properly. I just want to look at the Fandango app to see if my theater has sold out or not. It was really close. It was like 90-95% sold last I checked. But our tickets are back row center, and I know that a lot of our seating, a lot of the seats around us were being sold or were sold as well. And yet, you know what? It's still pretty much the same. It's still just that front row. That front row is largely what has not been sold. But everything, the first five rows of recliners in our particular theater sold, completely sold. So yeah, everybody just sit where the hell you're supposed to sit, right? Don't sit in the wrong seat. That's especially on that night, because on that night it will be like, no, get out. Like get up. This is not your seat. Like, this is where we're sitting. There are no other seats. Get up. This is not your seat. Right? That will happen. And hopefully it won't come to that. Hopefully we'll get there and there won't be any issues. But either way, usually if there's a bad experience, it's because of some other idiots. Usually, generally speaking, in that regard. Beyond the people talking shit about BVS. I'm talking about worse. If you want to talk shit about BVS, I can't tell you to shut up, even though I want to tell you to shut up. But it's still your business. You're talking to your friends in that regard, which is why I didn't say anything to them. But people sitting in my seat or people kicking my seat, no, unacceptable. So either way, those are my answers with respect to that. The last thing he said was, I can't believe I forgot to mention Father's Day last Flight Chat. Well, the Thursday prior, we went to a Beatles tribute concert. The Lennon performer played Imagine and dedicated it to Brian Wilson. And on Sunday, Tammy got to meet my dad for the second time and my dad's girlfriend for the first time. We played music together. I got him a Sgt. Pepper's poster. He included pictures of that. He included pictures of the poster. Oh, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. It's a classic. Yeah. No, that is cool. That's really cool. I'm glad you guys had a really awesome Father's Day. Sounds like it was a lot of fun. Especially, I mean, come on, Beatles and Father's Day, hell yes. Especially, when they do give their tribute to Brian Wilson, most certainly, may he rest in peace. So, thank you as always for the feedback, John. It is always greatly appreciated. Good sir, we're all good going forward. All right, next up is Amr Osama with his feedback this week titled, You Keep Dancing with the Devil, One Day He's Gonna Follow You Home. Also TNG and more. All right, let's get to it. He says, Hey Ray, I hope you're doing well and that the wonderful people tuning in are too. Yes, hopefully everybody is. He says, I've got a lot to talk about in this brand new email, as you can tell from the title. I finally got the chance to see Ryan Coogler's new film Sinners, as well as the 3-episode premiere of Ironheart, not to mention my ever-expanding thoughts on Star Trek The Next Generation. But before I dive into all of that, how's the FIFA Club World Cup going? That is a question I honestly cannot answer, Amr, but he says, I'm guessing you might not be much of a soccer fan, or football, as we call it, since most Americans aren't, he says. But I figured I'd ask, especially with the tournament being hosted in the U.S. ahead of next year's actual World Cup. My local team, Al Ahly, I hope I pronounced that right, took part in the tournament, but unfortunately they didn't make it past the group stage. They had matches at Hard Rock Stadium in Miami and MetLife Stadium in New Jersey. Not sure if any games were held near where you are. Also, didn't mean to get too political, but your commander-in-chief has been stirring up quite a bit of trouble on our side of the world ever since the U.S. strikes on Iran. In response, Iran launched retaliatory strikes on several neighboring countries that host U.S. military bases. Thankfully, there aren't any in Egypt, so we've managed to stay out of the crossfire. Yes, and I dearly hope that you do manage to stay out of the crossfire, Amr. As much as I would love to apologize for the absolute batshit behavior of our commander-in-chief and all of the stooges that he has employed in the White House and in Congress. I mean, it's. I hear you. You don't want to get political, but yeah, it's tough to live through what's happening right now in the world and not acknowledge it on some level, right? We're not going to stick our heads in the sand. So yeah, hopefully you stay safe, man, and hopefully this absolute bullshittery, which is not just his fault, it's also the fault of the government of Israel, among others, and Russia, of course. Hopefully none of that touches you. Hopefully all of you and yours can stay clear of this absolute bullshit. I cannot answer your question about FIFA World Cup because no, I do not follow it. So I am unfortunately not up on those particular standings and how that is going. I guess if we take a look here, if we look at the FIFA site, let's see. Okay, I'm okay with that. Privacy, tournaments. Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot. There's a lot here. Rankings. Are we even ranked? I guess in the women's world ranking, we're number 1. We are not ranked in the top 5 in the men's ranking. That's about right. As far as I know, I've always known women's USA soccer to be far superior to men's for the most part. Like I've seen the women win the big and win the World Cup and stuff. I have never seen the men do that. So yeah, I just whichever, it is what it is. I can't say I'm feeling all that patriotic, to be honest with you, with respect to that. But either way, he says, okay, moving on from the saddening state of the world to much happier things like movies, comic, and TV shows. Yes, indeed. Have you seen the new Superman clip that aired on Jimmy Kimmel Live? Yes, I have. He says, I found it hilarious mostly because of how Lex totally rage baits Superman. The clip is funny not just because of the dialogue, but also because of how out of context it is. It opens with Lex and some guy casually talking business. And okay, here's the thing. I'm not going to go through this description, because this is a policy that I have had on my show, and I did this with the Batman, and I will continue to do this. Even though these clips have been officially released by Warner Brothers, because, like you said, you saw it on Jimmy Kimmel. There's other clips. Like, I watched the CBS Morning News interview this morning, the special they did with David Cornswet and James Gunn, where they were talking about the movie, and there are clips in there as well. I am not going to describe them because it is people's choice whether or not they wish to watch those clips or not. There are plenty of people that consider those clips spoilers, and so I won't divulge what was actually in them. So I'm sorry, Amr, I cannot talk about what you saw in this clip, about what we saw in this particular clip. Here's what I will say with respect to what you wrote here is I do agree that I do like the clip, and I do think it's the comparison that you made in the last sentence about this clip is one that I have seen other people make, And I know that Phil Barker saw that comparison on Threads and thought that it was wild. I don't think it's quite so wild because I see where people are making that comparison. We'll talk about this after the movie comes out. We will. I promise we will. Because this is going to be what happens in this clip. It's not necessarily like, it doesn't divulge the entirety of the plot, but it's definitely a moment that if you haven't seen it, you want to wait and see it in the theater. It is. It's similar to a couple of clips from the Batman that was the same way. So sorry, Amber, I'm not going to divulge exactly what you wrote in this clip. I would just tell you that I agree with you, and I did like it as well. And I am curious to see exactly what the full context of what that is with respect to that, why that scene went the way that it did. But all right, let's move on to non-spoilery things. He says, now in regard to my horror question from last week, first off, thank you for recommending Event Horizon. Lawrence Fishburne and Sam Neill, say no more. It's officially on my watch list, and I might check it out soon as part of my ongoing journey to catch up on horror films I've missed out on. Second, I totally agree with what you said, and I think my relationship with horror films is similar to yours. The Conjuring films come to mind, not just because I watched them recently, but because they offer more than just jump scares. There's actual plot and character development there. Dr. Sleep is another good example. It didn't really scare me, but it was still a great watch. What it lacked in fright, it made up for in storytelling and character work. The main reason I asked that question, he says, is because the common perception of horror films is that they're supposed to be terrifying, like make you pass out in the theater terrifying. We've heard all those stories over and over again, but I'm starting to think there's a lot more to the genre than just fear factor alone. Agreed. 1000% agree. There is a lot more to that genre, and that's something that I didn't even realize, Amr, until 6 years ago when I really started to dive in to some more of those movies. And I do have to thank Scott over at Squadcast Media for that, because it was his idea. He wanted to see the It movies. He wanted to see Dr. Sleep, and I said, you know what, I'll dive headfirst into it. And my perspective on the genre has greatly changed in the last 6 years. And there are definitely more of those movies that I absolutely want to watch now, that I think will have, the storytelling and character work that I think both of us are looking for in that regard. But here we go. Here's a great segue. He says, speaking of horror, I've had the chance to watch Sinners, and I'll give my thoughts spoiler-free, just in case. Well, I did see it, Amr. I saw it twice, and I did review it. There's a FLITE review episode from back in April when it came out, so no spoilers for me, but cool, just in case anybody else hasn't seen it and would like to see it, although I feel like a lot of the listeners have seen it. But either way, he says Sinners is the latest film from director Ryan Coogler, who I was first introduced to through one of my favorite films, Creed, which I like this movie. Also stars Michael B. Jordan. Yes, indeed. Coogler is a filmmaker whose work I've thoroughly enjoyed, he says, especially the massive box office successes Black Panther and Black Panther Wakanda Forever. I've seen all of his films, with the exception of Fruitvale Station, which is still on my watch list. That's the same for me, Amr. I've seen all of his films except Fruitvale Station. And for me, Fruitvale Station, I know that story. I know about the Oscar Grant story. I'm just not in a hurry to watch it. It's just one of those where it's like, okay, I'm gonna be pissed off when this movie's over, and I will pick a time. Right? Yeah, it's just like I say with black people. It's like you can't be having a great day and just come home and go, hey, let me throw in Roots, or let me toss in Boys in the Hood, or whatever. Right? Just stuff like that. And I know I've heard great things. I've heard it's a powerful movie. I've been told I should watch it, and I will. I will watch it at some point, so then I can say that I have seen all of Ryan Coogler's theatrically released films. I own Black Panther. I own both the Black Panther films. I've got Sinners on pre-order. It's supposed to come out, be shipped to me the same day of the Amazon screening when we're going to go see Superman on July 8th is when it's supposed to arrive, hopefully. Because they've been selling out of copies and replenishing their stock at Amazon for the last couple of months. But yeah, glorious 4K steelbook of that should be on the way on July 8th. But either way, Amr says, I had been hearing about Sinners long before it had a name. It was first reported as an untitled Coogler project set to star Michael B. Jordan in a period piece vampire film. When the trailer finally dropped, those rumors were confirmed. Michael B. Jordan plays twin brothers Smoke and Stack in a Southern Gothic horror drama, alongside an incredible cast including Haley Steinfeld, Delroy Lindo, Wunmi Masaku, and others. Naturally, with Coogler both writing and directing and the buzz around the film growing after its premiere, Sinners quickly became a must-watch for me, he says. Unfortunately, I didn't get the chance to see it in theaters, mainly due to ticket prices and concerns about censorship where I live, since this is an R-rated film. But it recently hit digital platforms and I finally watched it, he says. I'll admit, I was nervous that the massive praise would raise my expectations too high. I was afraid I'd be let down. But I wasn't, he says. Sinners delivered. And yet, it wasn't exactly what I expected. I thought it would be more action heavy. It wasn't, but it delivered just enough action while focusing more heavily on character, mood, and meaning. The story follows twin brothers Smoke and Stack as they return to their small hometown in 1930s Jim Crow era America after a stint in Chicago, the criminal kind of stint. Their ambition is to open a juke joint nightclub in their old community. Most of the film unfolds over the course of a single day with the exception of a post-credit scene set in modern times, which is the true end of the movie, which I was telling people that there were people that were getting up to leave the theater, like, as that scene was happening. It's like, this isn't the end of the movie. Movie isn't over. Like, the movie will end when the post-credit scene is over. And it's really a mid-credit scene, to be honest with you, because there's also a post-credit scene as well. But he says, as we follow them, we're introduced to old romantic entanglements, fractured family ties, and deeper tensions simmering beneath the surface. Early on, we sense that the brothers intend to uplift their community, but also to lead it. They're not just back to party or lay low, they're here with purpose. Then, as hinted in the trailer, supernatural forces begin to emerge, specifically vampires. You might wonder, does this sudden shift derail the story? Is it another From Dusk Till Dawn situation, where the film switches gears halfway through with no warning or rationale? The answer is no. In From Dusk Till Dawn, he says, the narrative pivots drastically despite having a clear direction. But in Sinners, the supernatural turn is essential. If it hadn't come, the film would have risked being a beautifully shot, well-acted, but meandering story about a party. Something had to happen. And when it does happen, it resonates. The vampire elements don't feel out of place. Instead, they carry weight, serving as metaphors for systemic oppression, cultural memory, and spiritual reckoning. This isn't just a genre twist for thrills. It means something. The film is rich with themes. Political, social, and racial commentary are ever present, layered with music, romance, sex, and more. Every scene feels charged with symbolism, with contradictions, with questions. Some elements made me reflect. Others made me pause and interpret. Visually, Sinners is stunning. I regret not seeing it in IMAX. Even on a smaller screen, the imagery, color palettes, lighting, set design was deeply immersive. The period setting felt real and dreamlike all at once. The musical numbers were woven in so elegantly that they elevated the film's rhythm rather than halting it. One of the film's greatest strengths is its soundtrack, he says. I'm not a huge blues fan, but the way this film embraced and honored the genre was moving. Even moments when the soundtrack shifted to white country music were handled with grace and respect, not mockery. This musical contrast, too, had meaning. It's Irish, actually. Irish, but that's a whole other thing. Then there's Sammy, he says, also called Preacher Boy, who in many ways feels like the film's true protagonist. His musical performance in the nightclub was one of the most powerful scenes I've seen in a long time. Yes, that is one of the more talked about scenes without question. As he sang, his voice slowly faded, though not completely, and a man with a guitar stepped in and began to shred. Then Annie's voiceover began, and everything clicked. There are legends of people born with the gift of making music so true it can pierce the veil between life and death, conjuring spirits from the past and the future. That line gave me chills, he said. The entire sequence was transcendent. Honestly, if the movie had ended right there, it would have been enough. But it didn't. The film kept going and kept giving, he says. The action sequences, though limited, were impactful and full of detail. There were choreographed musical numbers performed by the vampire characters, both antagonists and ones they turned, that are surprisingly beautiful and unironically compelling. Two scenes in particular just made me stop and think, what brilliance, what craft. And the ending? Phenomenal. Michael B. Jordan gives the best performance of his career. Yes, he plays two characters, but while they're similar, they're not the same. He brings subtle differences to both Smoke and Stack that are grounded, believable, and emotionally rich. Sinners is tremendous, he says. And I've tried my best to talk about it without spoiling it. You've let a few spoilers, but either way, you did a valiant job. He says, just know this, it's worth watching. Not for the genre or the actors or the director, but for the experience, the emotion, the art. If the Oscars are paying attention this year, Sinners deserves to be in that conversation. I know spoilers for this movie is kind of okay, but just in case anyone listening hasn't watched the film yet, I've made my review spoiler-free. I give those who haven't watched it my absolute recommendation. Yes. Again, Amr, my full thoughts on Sinners can be found in a previous Flight Review episode. Which number was that? Here, let me check that real quick. Flight Review episode 50. That was published on April 19th. That's my Sinners review. That's my full review of the film when I went to go see it originally, and then I saw it a second time after that. So yeah, those are my full thoughts. I've also got another episode of Flightcast called the 204 episode, where I talk about the Sinners phenomenon and its success and what it means for Hollywood with respect to that, and also the silliness of a lot of the fan complaints against it, which that is also a good segue into your next point in your email, because you said that other than Sinners, you've also watched Ironheart. You said, I thought the first 3 episodes of Ironheart were a fun watch. It was great to see Iron Man-style suit action again. It's been a while since we've had that kind of kinetic, grounded tech in the MCU. The Iron Man connections aren't just visual. We're introduced to Ezekiel's spoilers. All right, spoilers. All right, here we go. Warning, spoilers. I forgot I have to give a spoiler warning for Ironheart because this show is still airing. Spoiler warning, Ironheart, spoilers. Warning, spoilers. All right, here we go. Got it. Okay. He says the Iron Man connections aren't just visual. We're introduced to Ezekiel Stane, son of Obadiah Stane, the villain from the original Iron Man. Played by Alden Ehrenreich, Ezekiel initially goes by the alias Joe McGillicuddy, which has to be one of the fakest names I've ever heard, even the show jokes about it. It's only later that his real identity is revealed. I was surprised to learn that Obadiah's death was officially covered up as a plane crash, not the explosive meltdown we saw in the first film. Maybe that detail was mentioned and I missed it, but it adds a nice layer of world building to the MCU. Ezekiel doesn't seem to be following in his father's footsteps, he says. In fact, he expresses deep resentment and shame toward Obadiah. He openly acknowledges that his father tried to kill Tony Stark and is terrified of becoming like him. He's doing everything he can to avoid that path, which gives his character emotional depth, far beyond what you'd expect from a typical legacy villain. I'm genuinely curious to see how Alden's character develops going forward. As for Riri Williams, he says, she was first introduced in Black Panther Wakanda Forever. I didn't know anything about her comic counterpart, and her role in that film didn't leave a major impression on me. She was fine, but not particularly compelling. This show provides much more insight into her character, and I now find her far more interesting and layered. Her origin isn't what I expected. He says the show explores a traumatic event from her past, the death of her stepfather and her childhood best friend Natalie in a drive-by shooting. This tragedy shapes much of Riri's personality and choices, adding real emotional weight to her story. That trauma resurfaces in a major way, he says, when Riri attempts to create an AI for her suit. Her goal is to build something similar to the Wakandan AI Griot she worked with in Wakanda Forever, which is why she uses brain scanning technology. But instead of creating a generic assistant, she accidentally generates a digital copy of Natalie. It's a startling, emotional moment that reframes her obsession with technology as something deeply personal and unresolved. Natalie's existence creates complications not only for Riri, but also for her mother, he says. When Natalie accidentally reveals herself, Riri's mother is stunned and amazed. Later, she asks if Riri could make one of her stepfather. Riri says no, understandably, since Natalie was a complete accident. Not to mention the ethical implications Natalie's existence raises. Also, Xavier, Natalie's brother, still doesn't know about her. The central arc of the show revolves around Riri trying to develop and refine her Ironheart suit, but after being expelled from MIT for selling homework to fund her work, she's strapped for cash. Out of desperation, she joins the Hood's gang, a necessary evil in her eyes. At first, she doesn't know his true motivations. He presents himself as someone targeting corrupt tech giants and eating the rich through high-stakes heists. The first heist goes off smoothly thanks to Riri's brilliance, but her conscience quickly begins to catch up with her. By episode 3, everything starts to unravel, he says. This is pretty much a recap. He's recapping the whole thing. This is where the story really picks up and spirals out of control, he says. Riri begins to suspect the Hood, played by Anthony Ramos, has darker motives than he lets on. A planned heist goes horribly wrong, culminating in Riri allowing Parker's brother to die of suffocation in a greenhouse. To be fair, she acted in self-defense. He was trying to kill her, but the emotional toll is devastating. Dominic Thorne nails the breakdown scene, repeatedly sobbing, "Oh no, what did I do? What have I done?" Speaking of Dominic Thorne, he says she's really good in this. She leaves a much stronger impression here than she did in Wakanda Forever. Not because she was bad in that film, but because I just didn't find her all that compelling there. This series gives her far more emotional range and screen time, and she really shines. She's also surrounded by a strong supporting cast. Alden Ehrenreich brings depth to Ezekiel Stane, and Anthony Ramos adds intensity and charm as the Hood. Angie White delivers a grounded, heartfelt performance as Riri's mother, and Lyric Ross is excellent as Natalie, balancing warmth, curiosity, and an eerie sense of uncanny presence that makes the AI feel like more than just code. I'm curious to see how the show deals with the fallout from this. The consequences don't just weigh on Riri. Ezekiel is also dragged in, as she borrowed one of his tools for the heist and left it behind during her scuffle with Cousin John. To make things worse, the Hood itself seemingly shows Parker that Riri is responsible for his brother's death. I also really appreciate the design of Riri's suit, he says. Instead of the usual nanotech we've seen dominate the MCU, Her suit is a practical mechanical build, very much in line with early Tony Stark designs. While I don't mind nanotech, there's something satisfying about watching real metal parts lock into place. Her suit is also powered by wind and solar energy rather than an arc reactor. As Riri puts it, they don't exactly hand those around. The soundtrack has also been another pleasant surprise, he says. I've discovered a couple of seriously catchy songs thanks to this show. Overall, Amr says Ironheart is off to a strong start. It mixes character-driven storytelling with tech-based action and explores meaningful moral dilemmas. Riri isn't just a genius engineer. She's a young woman wrestling with loss, ambition, guilt, and identity, and the series isn't afraid to let those themes breathe. I'm genuinely excited to see where it all goes next. It's a shame the show is being review bombed by a certain group of very unsavory people. Because of that, many are unfairly dismissing it or avoiding it altogether. The prejudice surrounding Ironheart is completely undeserved, and I really hope more people give it a fair chance. I can't believe some are actually calling it the worst thing to come out of the MCU. Seriously? That has to be one of the biggest lies I've ever heard. There's just no way anyone can honestly think this is the lowest point in Marvel media. Anyway, like I said, I'm looking forward to seeing how the show progresses. Well, Amr, we know those are bigots. We know those are racists. We know that those are people that are not interested in giving anything that is female-led, let alone black female-led, a fair shake. We know that, right? That's unfortunately the way of the world that we live in. Not just the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but just the world that we live in, unfortunately, is filled with a lot of those people who have gotten emboldened in the last number of years and feel like they can just throw their weight around and be absolute pieces of shit with respect to that. And I had read that they were trying to combat the review bombing on Rotten Tomatoes, and that, initially it premiered to like 35% rotten for the audience, and then it got bumped up to even numbers with the critic score, which right now the critic score is at 74% fresh by the critics. And now the popcorn meter for the audience is back down to 57, which means probably more review bombers have gotten a hold of it. It's bullshit. It's awful. It's stupid, and heavily bigoted in that regard. But I think that the numbers, hopefully hopefully Disney and Marvel Studios pays attention more to the numbers than they do to all of the racist assholes. And I can't say that I am that confident that Bob Iger and his one percenter ilk, who are all, old white men, I'm not confident that they will, see the light on this and, decide to continue with more of Ironheart. But hey, one can hope, right? I'm prepared for it to not get a second season, but one can hope that that is the case. And of course, again, my full thoughts on Ironheart you can find on the most recent episode of Flight Box, number 41, where I talk about episodes 1 through 3 and share a lot of the same stuff that you just talked about, Amr. But I will also be talking about episodes 3 through 6 on this upcoming Thursday's episode of Flight Box as well, so stay tuned for that. We'll talk about the entirety of Ironheart as the show comes to a close for this first and maybe only season, but hopefully not only season with respect to the show. But at any rate, he says, before I dive into TNG, I have a question for our resident Superman fan, Wally Mustafa, as you call him, Ray. First off, hi. I know this might be a bit out of left field, Wally, but with the release of Superman getting closer, I figured now's the perfect time to ask, could you recommend some underrated Superman comic stories for me to check out? Lately, I've been really in a Superman mood and looking to dive deeper into his world. Sure, I could just Google a list, but I thought it'd be way more interesting to hear your personal picks. Specifically, I'm after stories that don't usually make the typical best Superman comics of all time lists. Every time I search, I keep running into the usual suspects: the death and return of Superman, All-Star Superman, Superman for all seasons, etc. So what are some lesser-known gems, stories you think deserve more attention but tend to get overlooked in the bigger conversations? And of course, I don't mind if you, Ray, or anyone else wants to chime in with their own recommendations too. Yeah, I would be curious to hear Wally's thoughts. I'm sure he's mentioned a number of them in the past, but yeah, I would definitely be curious to hear what recommendations he gives you now. I know that two of the ones you listed there, Amr, are ones that I'm going to be reading here soon. All-Star Superman and Superman for All Seasons. I'm going to be doing episodes of Flight Report on Patreon for those in preparation for Superman on July 8th. So I've got a little over a week to read both of those. I'll get it done. I will, just like I did with year one for the Batman. Or not year one, 0 year for the Batman, pardon me. So stay tuned for that. I don't know, whoever is a member of the Patreon, those episodes will be popping up soon. I think Wally is a member of the Patreon still, if I'm not mistaken. So, yeah, be very curious to hear what his recommendations are, as we are just over a week away from the release of Superman, which, if we look at the marketing, I mean, that's looking to be the most heavily, marketed blockbuster of the year to this point. I've seen far more marketing for Superman than I have for Jurassic World Rebirth or for Fantastic Four First Steps, and we'll see if that all pays off. But I gotta tell you, the marketing effort that they put into this film, if that doesn't pay off, then damn it, just nothing was gonna work. Seriously, they have certainly not they've left no stone unturned with respect to marketing for Superman. Seriously, they've done an absolutely phenomenal job to this point with respect to that. So we will find out soon enough how if all that works out. All right, let's dive into the Star Trek portion of the email. He says, but before I dive in, you won't believe what the YouTube algorithm blessed me with last week. I was casually browsing when I stumbled across a channel called Newbie Star Trek, and yes, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a group of people who've never seen Star Trek before, watching The Next Generation and sharing their reactions through a podcast. As of now, they're into the second season of Deep Space Nine. I figured I'd mention it in case you were interested in checking them out. I have never heard of that. That's intriguing. I may give that a brief listen or so. All right, Newbie Star Trek. Thank you. Appreciate that. Now back to me, he says. I've just finished watching episodes 15 through 21 of TNG Season 6, and as always, here are my thoughts episode by episode. And he starts with episode 15, Tapestry. Here we go. Yes, I mentioned before, Ahmed, that because you didn't get a Q episode in Season 5, you were going to get 2 in this season, Season 6. You already got Hyde and Q, and now you've got the second one, Tapestry, which is the better one in my opinion. Let's see if you agree. He says, Tapestry was an amazing episode, quite possibly my favorite Q episode of all time so far. Yep, there we go. It resonated with me in such a deeply personal and unexpected way. Right from the cold open, the tone is set beautifully. Dr. Crusher is working frantically to save a mortally wounded Picard. His systems are failing. He's dying. And then suddenly we cut to a white void. Is this the afterlife? Picard sees a figure in the distance. At first it seems he might be encountering God, but no, to his disbelief and ours, it's Q, standing there with a smug, disappointed look in his face. He tells Picard that he's dead and in the afterlife. Picard, ever the skeptic, refuses to accept it. His line, I refuse to believe that the afterlife is run by you. The universe is not so badly designed, is classic. Picard, defiant, rational, and brilliantly delivered, that single moment encapsulates his character so well. Amr says, what makes the episode so compelling is how it balances humor, introspection, and philosophical weight. Unlike many Q appearances that lean into chaos or mischief, here Q takes on a more reflective role, like the ghost of Christmas past, offering Picard a chance to revisit a key moment from his youth, the bar fight with the Nausicaans that led to him receiving an artificial heart. We get a rare look into Picard's younger, more impulsive self, full of arrogance, pride, and emotion, but what really struck me was the lesson he learns when he chooses not to fight. Q lets him live out the version of his life where he avoids that violent, reckless decision, and in doing so, Picard becomes someone entirely different. Not the bold, respected captain we know, but a quiet, invisible junior science officer, competent, but unremarkable. That message hit hard, that our regrets, the choices we sometimes wish we could undo, are often the very things that shape who we become. Tapestry doesn't just suggest that our mistakes were good, or that suffering is ideal. It doesn't suggest that our mistakes were good, or that our suffering is ideal, but it reminds us that pain and failure often carve the path to growth, wisdom, and identity. The reason this episode resonated with me so deeply, he says, and why I know it does for so many others, is because I've had those moments too. Times where I've been haunted by the thought, what if I had done this differently? What if I had said that instead? Would things have turned out better? It's easy to fall into that mental rabbit hole, and I have more times than I can count, especially recently. But whenever I catch myself in that spiral, I stop, he says. I remind myself of my beliefs, that maybe this is for the best, that all the good and the bad choices, the missed chances and missteps, were necessary to bring me to where I am now. And that's exactly what this episode reaffirmed for me. It helped reinforce something I try to hold on to, that a life lived without scars might also be a life lived without meaning. Picard's journey in Tapestry isn't about erasing regret, it's about understanding it, accepting that the road we've walked with all its flaws was still ours to walk. And maybe that's what makes it worthwhile. This is one of those rare Star Trek episodes that transcends its genre. It may be science fiction on the surface, but at its core, it's about something much more universal. Reflection, regret, and self-acceptance. That's why it stuck with me, and why even beyond the Q of it all, this one will remain a favorite. Also, this is the first time a Q episode title doesn't have that play on the word Q. Yes, it is, and arguably that really speaks to how deep it is. Now, there's one other one. There's another one that you're going to get that doesn't have a play on the Q title, but I'm going to leave that alone because that's a massive spoiler and I won't give that one away. But, yeah, I think Tapestry is one of those episodes that, whether it is spoken a lot by the fandom. It is definitely a very introspective episode, definitely one that transcends, definitely one that has a message that speaks to all of us more than most other episodes of Star Trek does in that regard. And the fact that they're able to, that he lets Picard live out that other life, and you see exactly how different things would be, and all it took was just the rash decision to get stabbed in the heart by a Nausicaan is literally what set him on the road to be captain of the Enterprise. And that's insane to think of it that way, but just the way that the episode presents it, the way that that story is told, it's really, really well done. I'm with you on that one. It is probably the best Q episode, I think, of the entire show. I think I'd really have to agree with you on that one. And I enjoy all the Q episodes, but that one, yeah, definitely, I think, kind of stands alone at the top with respect to all the gravitas that it has. But you got one more Q episode to go. I'll at least tell you that. Got one more Q episode left. I'm not going to give away what it is or when it happens, but it would be interesting to see where you rank that one when we get to that. All right, next up, episodes 16 and 17. Oh, here we go. The other two-parter in season 6, Birthright, part 1 and 2. He says, my, another two-parter in one season? This season of TNG is getting feisty. Oh, yeah, quite feisty. I still stand by my belief and my opinion that season 5 is the best season of the show, but season 6 had some very strong moments, and here's another one. He says Birthright is a rich and ambitious two-parter that blends cultural introspection, personal growth, and thematic depth. While it begins as a dual-focus story with both Worf and Data taking center stage, it gradually becomes a Worf-centric tale by part 2. Still, the emotional and philosophical underpinnings of both narratives are deeply connected. Each is about identity, legacy, and at its core, fathers. Worf's storyline is the emotional anchor of this arc. After learning that his father, Moog, might have survived the Kittimer massacre and is possibly imprisoned in a Romulan camp, Worf sets off on what he believes will be a rescue mission, but instead of finding his father, he discovers something far more complex. A hidden colony where Klingons and Romulans coexist in peace, and children growing up know nothing of Klingon tradition or heritage. Worf's initial reaction is one of horror. To him, the idea of Klingons living peacefully under Romulan oversight, especially without honor or warrior pride, is unthinkable. But as he spends more time there, the situation begins to reveal its nuance. These aren't traitors or cowards. They're people who have chosen peace over violence, and children who've never had a choice. Worf's internal struggle deepens further when he connects with Bael, a woman of mixed Klingon-Romulan heritage, and begins to challenge his own prejudices. That confrontation with the elders and his ultimate decision to leave the colony while giving the children a choice was one of the most powerful and integrity-driven moments of his arc. He says Worf truly takes on a Lisan al-Gaib-like role in Part 2. Much like the prophesied figure in Dune, he becomes a cultural and spiritual guide to a new generation. I do hope the analogy comparison serves me right. Not quite as religious, Amr, but I get where you're coming from with that. He says these young Klingons see in him a warrior that they've only heard whispers of, and Worf approaches them not as a conqueror, but as a teacher, introducing them to songs, stories, and the deeper meanings behind Klingon identity. He does all this mainly through one Klingon named Tok. He doesn't impose culture. He plants seeds of it. It's not just about reminding him how to fight. It's about helping him, and through him, the rest of the Klingons remember who they are. It marks a key moment of growth for Worf where he moves beyond defending his own honor to preserving a heritage bigger than himself. Data's storyline, he says, in Part 1, offers a beautifully surreal counterbalance. After a surge of energy from a device on Deep Space Nine, Data begins to experience dreams, a literal dream state, which is something no one believed an android was capable of. It's a turning point in his development. Through this dreamlike experience filled with abstract and symbolic imagery, a blacksmith, a bird inside him, Data taps into something closer to intuition and imagination, traits he has long associated with humanity. These dreams seem to echo the intentions of his creator, Dr. Soong, reaching out to him from beyond the grave. What's fascinating, he says, is how Data's arc also centers on his father, not in a literal sense, but as the one who gave him life and the potential to grow. This is legacy in a more metaphysical sense, as Data inches closer to the essence of being human. The conversation with Dr. Bashir and that moment where he paints his visions adds a layer of introspective mysticism rarely seen in TNG, and I have to say it was oddly jarring to see Brent Spiner without his usual android makeup. Yes, because he plays a younger Dr. Soong, Dr. Noonien Soong in this. He says, while Part 1 gives both Worf and Data strong narrative ground, Part 2 pivots fully towards Worf's journey, making it unmistakably his episode. That's a slightly unusual structure for TNG, which typically keeps its A and B plots more parallel, but here the tonal shift works. Data's arc is concluded cleanly in the first half, and that gives Worf's story room to breathe and unfold with emotional depth. In a way, both stories are about reconciling the past with the present. Data seeks to understand the unknowable pieces of himself through dreams of his creator. Worf confronts the painful realities of his heritage and steps into a role of leadership and guidance. At the core of both stories is the same theme: fathers. Whether through Data's evolving relationship with the legacy of Dr. Soong or Worf's painful search for Moog, both characters wrestle with identity through the lens of family, culture, and inheritance, he says. One explores it through dreams and abstract memory, the other through blood, shame, and responsibility. And let's not forget, Amr says, this two-parter also marks our first proper glimpse of Deep Space Nine. While your first proper glimpse in TNG, Deep Space Nine Season 1 had already been going, and yes, I and many others were watching the shows concurrently. So, it's the first proper glimpse of Deep Space Nine in TNG, so it's the first crossover. He says it was a cool moment of world building to see the station and meet Dr. Julian Bashir. Bashir immediately piqued my interest. DS9 has been on my radar ever since I began TNG. I've only read the show's synopsis and caught this small glimpse of it, but both have definitely amplified my enthusiasm to dive into that series once I'm done with TNG. I have a feeling, Amr, that Dr. Bashir's character will appeal to you more personally in a cultural sense for a number of reasons, not just because of the character, but also the actor himself, Alexander Siddig, if you do a little bit of research on him as well. He's got a side note here that he wrote in red. He says, side note, I still don't know what to do after TNG. It's honestly starting to feel overwhelming. You've done a darn good job hyping me up and selling/pitching me for the other Star Trek shows, and now I just don't know how to continue. My original plan, he says, if you remember, was to move straight into the TNG movies after finishing the show, and then go on to Star Trek Picard after that, and then go back and start DS9. But after our last flight chat, you've piqued my interest in Deep Space Nine even more than I already had, and this episode only amped that up, mainly because of Dr. Bashir. So what should I do? Should I watch a season of DS9 after TNG Season 6 and then return to finish Season 7? I think DS9 premiered around the same time as TNG Season 6. Yes, it did. Same year. Or should I finish TNG entirely and then start DS9, watching it in tandem with the movies? I mean, the movies are short and quick, so that could work. And let's not forget, there's still Star Trek Voyager, and now, ever since that Scotty episode, the original series has also made its way onto my list and more beyond that. So yeah, I'd really love to hear your input on this. To finish his thoughts on Birthrights, he says, all in all, Birthright stands out as one of the stronger two-parters in Season 6. It dares to juggle bold shifts in tone, from surreal AI introspection to politically charged Klingon drama, another ambitious and emotionally resonant installment in what's shaping up to be an incredible season. Okay, so agree with all your thoughts on Birthright. Fantastic two-parter, really well done. Now, to answer your question, Armor, that you wrote in red, here's the thing. I'm going to recommend to you that you go into DS9 after TNG. Now, you don't need to watch DS9 and TNG concurrently. You can if you want to, but you don't need to, because there really isn't anything that happens between both shows. The only thing that really happens is O'Brien's going to leave. O'Brien is going to leave if he hasn't already left. I think at this point he probably has already left the Enterprise and has gone aboard Deep Space Nine. So the only other thing that happens is the pilot of Deep Space Nine does involve Picard and the Enterprise, because the story of Benjamin Sisko, the commander of Deep Space Nine, is very much interwoven with Jean-Luc Picard, and I won't give away exactly how, but it's a doozy. It's very much a doozy. And in my opinion, because of certain things that are introduced in Deep Space Nine, including that pop up in Star Trek Picard, I think it's better that you watch Deep Space Nine before you watch Picard, because there's going to be things that are introduced in Deep Space Nine that show up in Picard later that you won't have context for, and you need to have that full context, in my opinion. So I think you should absolutely push Picard to the side. Don't jump from TNG straight to this. You got a lot. And it's not just the movies, because I know there's the 4 TNG movies, but you've also got the what is set up in Deep Space Nine. There are things, there are plot lines, and a part of this is also because I don't want to give this away. I'll just say that there's another cast member from TNG that ends up joining Deep Space Nine later. That's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm going to say with respect to that. If you don't know, don't look it up. Don't research it. It's a spoiler. It's out there. But yeah, watch DS9 next. Absolutely. At 1000%, watch DS9 next. I know it's overwhelming. I know there's a lot. I know we're working with almost 60 years worth of content here. I get it. But yeah, watch DS9 next. That is my biggest recommendation. You can finish TNG. You can. You can do it one of two ways. You can start watching it concurrently if you want, because you're right. Season 6 of TNG happens at the same time as Season 1 of Deep Space Nine. So you could technically go from Season 6 of TNG into Season 1 of DS9. You could do that. And then you can also watch Season 2 of DS9 concurrently with Season 7 of TNG. You can do that. Or you can finish TNG and then go into DS9 after that, and just understand that there will be a few things, not a ton, but a few things in that pilot that, don't necessarily point to it. Actually, crap. I just remembered something that happens at the end of Season 7 that directly references. Okay. All right, Amr. Okay. Here's the thing. Okay, I'm thinking of this in real time here. It may be better for continuity's sake, because otherwise, and it's only it's a couple of episodes. A couple of episodes are going to pop up here at the tail end of Star Trek TNG that are going to reference something that takes place that, shapes together in DS9 in those first two seasons, right? So it really comes down to whether or not you're concerned about continuity with respect to a couple of events. Nothing huge, but a couple of the big stuff that happens in Deep Space Nine, thankfully, is after TNG is over, right? Season 3 of DS9, the show takes a hell of a turn. But I don't want to put off those first two seasons, because I do think the first two seasons of DS9 are stronger than the first two seasons of, say, TNG, or, some of the other weaker first two seasons of Star Trek in that regard. But yeah, either way, I definitely think DS9 is the show that you should watch next, either concurrently with the last two seasons of TNG, or you can finish TNG and go into that, and just understand that there may be some blanks that DS9 will have to fill in for you later with particular episodes that you haven't seen yet in TNG. So that's what I will say about that. Either way, Deep Space Nine should be your next stop. I completely 100% recommend that. All right, now let's get back to your recaps, because this next episode is an intriguing one-off. Episode 18, Starship Mine. He says, this was a fun episode. You could call this one a pseudo-bottle episode meets Die Hard on the Enterprise, as most of the focus is on Jean-Luc Picard trying to foil a heist he stumbles upon while alone on the ship. Actually, Air Force One starring Harrison Ford could be a much better comparison. Oh no, Die Hard works. Die Hard absolutely works, because that was a heist. That was absolutely a heist. I mean, there's definitely an Air Force One component to it, because it's his ship, and get off my plane, get off my ship. Absolutely. But Die Hard meets Air Force One. That's a good comparison. I like that. He says Starship Mine functions as a tense yet streamlined breather after the more layered episodes like Birthright. Calling it a Die Hard scenario is right on point. The stakes are self-contained, he says. The focus is squarely on Picard, and the plot moves quickly with a clear objective: stop the criminals before they steal trilithium resin and blow up the ship. What's especially satisfying is how capable and hands-on Picard is shown to be. Removed from diplomacy or bridge command, he says, we see his tactical mind and physical presence in action. Patrick Stewart plays it with grit, but keeps that Picard calm and dry wit, especially when he impersonates Mr. Mott, the ship's barber. That moment is pure TNG humor in the middle of a tense situation. Another strength of the episode, he says, is how lean it is. There's no major subplots to split our attention. It's Picard against the infiltrators, solving problems with both brains and fists. The rest of the crew is largely sidelined, while in other episodes it might feel like a flaw, but here it just gives the captain a rare spotlight in a more physical, suspense-driven story. Yeah, because the subplot, they're just incapacitating and holding the rest of the senior staff hostage while Picard has to deal with the thieves in that regard, yeah. So I agree with you. It does work with that balance. He says, while not as emotionally resonant as other entries this season, Starship Mine succeeds as a high-energy one-off with enough action, tension, and clever writing to leave a strong impression. The humor is delivered mostly through Data, he says, who's attempting to learn the art of small talk. At first, the crew is visibly uncomfortable with his mechanical attempts at casual conversation, but this quickly turns into comedic gold when he meets his match, Commander Hutchinson. Data's small talk subplot is a delightful counterbalance to the main action. Watching him approach idle conversation like a scientific experiment is classic Data, and Brent Spiner pulls it off with impeccable timing. His scene with Hutchinson, who talks just as excessively and awkwardly as Data, is especially hilarious. It's like watching two social simulators crash into each other in a feedback loop of relentless chit-chat. That moment, he says, also cleverly transitions us into the real conflict with the rogue Starfleet personnel spring their heist. It's a smart setup. Start in the most mundane setting possible and suddenly shift into phaser fire and hostage taking. The contrast adds energy and makes the stakes feel immediate. Altogether, Starship Mine is a fun, tightly constructed episode that balances action with character-driven comedy. It demonstrates TNG's range, he says, showing that the series can just as easily deliver espionage thrills and suspense as it can philosophical drama or heartfelt exploration. It's also a rare and satisfying chance to watch Picard go full action hero while still staying true to who he is. Yeah, Starship Mine isn't talked about a ton except for the fact that Tim Russ is in it. Tim Russ, who is one of the thieves, the Black Thief, if you will. He later becomes a Star Trek regular as Lieutenant Tuvok, the security chief aboard the USS Voyager on Star Trek Voyager. But don't worry about that until not to make it even more daunting for you. But yeah, he will show up later as a regular in that series down the road, and of course, everybody knows him from Spaceballs. From the combing the desert scene. He's the one with the Afro pick that says, "We ain't found shit." And he comments on how he's still remembered for that. And I hope he's in the new one. I hope he's in the Spaceball sequel that Josh Gad is working on with Mel Brooks. I hope so. If Rick Moranis is coming back, I hope Tim Russ comes back for that as well. That needs to happen. That absolutely needs to happen. We still ain't found shit. Yes, there needs to be another one of those combing the desert scenes like that. That'd be great. All right, next one, episode 19, Lessons. Oh, okay, here we go. Here's a softer one. He says, okay, all right, I see. Romance, huh? I dig it. Lessons is definitely a romance episode, he says, and a rare one at that, because it actually takes the idea seriously. It's not just a one-off flirtation or a background subplot. This time we get a real look at what a committed relationship might look like for Captain Picard. His connection with Lieutenant Commander Nella Darren was portrayed with genuine chemistry, mutual respect, and emotional vulnerability, all of which we rarely see from him. The musical bond they share, especially through the Ressican flute, adds even more emotional depth and beautifully calls back to the inner light. That alone hit hard for me, he says. The Ressican flute isn't just an Easter egg, it's a deeply personal artifact that symbolizes the quiet, tender part of Picard he keeps hidden. Seeing him let someone into that part of himself again, it was incredibly poignant. Their duet in the Jeffries tube wasn't just romantic. It was vulnerable in a way that made Picard feel more human than ever. In many ways, this felt like a spiritual sequel to The Inner Light, a quiet continuation of the emotional journey that episode started. Picard may have only lived that other life for 25 minutes, but it clearly left a permanent mark. Yes, indeed it did. And yet it's also kind of tragic, he says. We know who Picard is. He's a brilliant and noble captain, but he doesn't get that without sacrifice. His dilemma, balancing his personal feelings with his command responsibilities, felt so grounded in who he is. The decision to end things wasn't born out of coldness or a lack of love, but from a painful understanding of what duty demands. That scene during the final 10 minutes or so of the episode, him alone in his quarters, sitting in silence, approaching the flute box and gently closing it, was honestly heartbreaking. That tiny gesture says everything, he says. He opened himself up just a little, and now he's tugging it all away again, quietly, completely alone. What really made this episode land, he says, is how mature and honest it was. This wasn't a melodramatic breakup. It was two professionals who deeply care for each other, acknowledging that staying together might do more harm than good, emotionally and professionally. That kind of adult, nuanced heartbreak isn't something you see often in sci-fi, and it hit harder than I expected. This is a very nuanced and introspective take on this episode, Amr, that's for sure, but of course that's how all of your breakdowns are. He says, now something that caught me off guard. Picard saying there were no Starfleet regulations regarding workplace relationships. Really? For such a structured, disciplined organization, that surprised me. You'd think that kind of hierarchy would have strict rules about fraternization, especially between commanding officers and subordinates, but that's also what made the episode interesting. The tension wasn't about breaking protocol, it was about personal ethics. Just because it's allowed doesn't mean it's wise, and Picard knows it. His discomfort didn't come from fear of reprimand, but from his conscience and understanding of leadership. He knows that love could cloud his judgment, put her at risk, or at the very least look like favoritism. That's what makes the episode work so well, he says. It doesn't shy away from the moral and emotional complexity of the situation. Instead, it embraces it. There's no clean answer, just very human consequences. Also, he says, I couldn't help but notice that Nella Darren bears a strong resemblance to Beverly Crusher. Was that intentional? Because Jean-Luc definitely seems to have a type. The red hair, the composed intellect, the calm strength. It's subtle, but it's there. It made me wonder if that casting choice was meant to draw a quiet parallel. The show has always flirted with the will they, won't they dynamic between Picard and Beverly, and Darren almost feels like a version of what could have been. someone he could have loved under different circumstances. That echo adds another layer to the story, the sense that Picard is capable of love, but the circumstances of his life and career just won't allow it. So yeah, Lessons really surprised me. It starts out warm and charming with music and connection, and ends on such a quietly devastating note. It's not flashy or high stakes in the typical sci-fi sense, but emotionally, it hits hard. It shows us the cost of command, the loneliness, the sacrifices, and the beautiful fleeting moments of connection that can't quite survive the weight of duty. It's one of those episodes that lingers. I'm sure other people have had very introspective thoughts on this episode, but that is the first time I've ever seen them. That is really, really well done, Amr, with respect to your thoughts on that. And I will say that in as far as Nella Darren looking like Crusher, yeah, I do think there's something to that, especially since she was sciences as well, right? So she's still wearing the blue uniform, the same one that Beverly wears as well. The hair you mentioned, not just the color, but also the hairstyle. Yeah, I do think that there were parallels intentionally drawn there with respect to Picard's type. And I would also say that when it comes to Starfleet regulations regarding workplace relationships, believe it or not, that is something that is established in season 1 of the original series. And that particular episode, the way that episode ends, is heartbreaking. I won't give away what episode it is. I will tell you, though, that the episode that it is revealed in is a very classic, well talked about episode, one that is a landmark episode in the franchise, right? But it's not looked at for that particular subplot because that whole issue of Starfleet regulations regarding workplace relationships, that's a subplot to the main plot of the episode, but it goes into everything that you're talking about in terms of how it's not about breaking protocol, it's about personal ethics, because just because it's allowed doesn't mean that it's wise. And in that regard, in that episode, same situation. But this is in 1966. This is in the very first season of TOS. So not to make things even more daunting for you, but if you ever want to find out, if you ever want to see how that played out, you can absolutely watch that particular episode. I won't give away the title because if and when you do get to TOS, that'll be one that you can observe and like explore and examine for yourself, experience yourself in that regard. But yeah, that is definitely a Starfleet tenet that goes on, like from the beginning in that regard for sure. But yeah, great insight into that particular episode. So you got 2 more left here. Here's a big one, The Chase. Yes, episode 20. He says this one's a big lore episode, an archaeological mystery, a race against multiple alien factions, and a surprising revelation about the origins of humanoid life in the galaxy. What began as a classic archaeological adventure unexpectedly becomes a pivotal moment in Star Trek lore. It's also worth noting, he says, that this episode was directed by Jonathan Frakes, aka Will Riker, who's already shown his steady hand behind the camera in several earlier episodes, something I failed to mention somehow when talking about previous episodes. For example, he directed one of my favorite Worf-centric episodes in Season 3, Reunion. The Chase, is that Season 3 or 4? I want to say it's Season 4, but either way, Reunion, yes. The chase kicks off as a more personal Picard-centric story, he says. We're introduced to Professor Galen, Picard's old archaeology mentor, and quickly learn that Jean-Luc once seriously considered a life in archaeology before choosing Starfleet. That detail has been mentioned or implied in earlier episodes, but here it's brought front and center. You really get to see that more passionate intellectual side of him, the one that lights up when faced with ancient mysteries and cultural puzzles rather than diplomacy or battle strategy. There's definitely a bit of an Indiana Jones in space vibe in the first half, he says, as the crew follows a trail of clues across the galaxy while contending with competing parties like the Klingons, Romulans, and Cardassians. But true to Star Trek fashion, the final reward isn't treasure, it's understanding. And what a reveal it is, he says, that nearly all the major humanoid species in the Alpha Quadrant, humans, Klingons, Romulans, Cardassians, and others, were seeded by an ancient progenitor race. It's a beautiful bit of myth building that retroactively explains a long-standing, mostly unaddressed quirk of the franchise: why so many alien species look fundamentally human. Honestly, he says, I never really needed an explanation for that. Chalked it up to TV production limitations. But I'm glad they gave one anyway. It wasn't a plot hole begging to be filled, but it adds a layer of elegance to the universe, and it fits perfectly with the ethos of Star Trek that even our enemies might be more like us than we think. Beneath centuries of conflict and ideological divides, there's a shared origin, a literal genetic connection between species that still can't seem to get along. That's a very Trek message if there ever was one. The final scene, where all these rivals hear the holographic message from the progenitor species, is both hopeful and a little sad. Even after learning they're all related, the factions are still quick to turn back to old tensions. The knowledge doesn't magically bring peace, but it plants a seed. In that way, the episode mirrors Picard's own journey, the pursuit of truth, even if others aren't quite ready to accept or act on it. He says Frakes' direction is solid throughout. The episode juggles a lot, shifting tones from mystery to diplomacy to philosophy, and he keeps it grounded, letting the emotional beats land amidst the exposition and lore. He knows how to let quieter moments breathe, like Picard reflecting on his lost chance to reconnect with Galen, and how to keep the energy up during the multi-faction chase across space. The episode also isn't without its lighter moments. One standout is the scene between the Klingon captain and Data in 10 Forward. It's a small comedic beat, but it gives the episode a moment to breathe and reminds us how well TNG can blend seriousness with humor. In the end, the chase is a standout because it balances personal storytelling with galaxy-shaping mythology and gives us insight into Picard's inner world while expanding the Trek universe in a way that feels both meaningful and poetic. It's not just an adventure, it's a meditation, a legacy, connection, and the common threads that tie us all together. Okay. Few things with this one, Amr, before we get to your last episode, because I'm really excited now that I know the last episode that you watched. First, this particular episode is drawn upon again in a Paramount Plus Star Trek series. You'll get there. No hurry, no rush, not daunting. I will just let you know that what is teased, what is brought up in lore-wise, what's raised lore-wise in this particular episode does get fleshed out further in a future Paramount Plus Star Trek series. It does. For just about an entire season. So, yeah, look forward to that. Also, the actress who plays the progenitor speaking to everyone, her name is Salome Jens. Remember that name and remember that voice, especially if you decide to go into Deep Space Nine, because you're going to just remember the name, remember her name, and remember her voice. It's going to sound familiar, and you're going to be like, yeah, if you decide to go into Deep Space Nine. She is about to play the actor, not the progenitor, but the actor playing the character is about to play a very pivotal role in Deep Space Nine, at least from the 3rd season on. I'll put it that way. I cannot wait till you get to that. This is exciting. I'm getting excited again. And then beyond that, I would also say, remember the name Galen, because that name's going to come up again in the next season. Not this season, but in the next season. Somewhat comedically, but also in terms of an alias, if you will. I'll put it that way. So, yeah, the chase. I hear you. I didn't need necessarily an explanation for the humanoid thing either, but it is cool that there is one within lore, because not only just in terms of like everybody being humanoid, but also the the similarities in anatomy, right? They all bleed, right? But they've got different color blood because they're based on different hemoglobin, right? So it's green blood for Vulcans and Romulans. It's purple blood for Klingons. They've all got hearts, but they're in the same place. And some of them have more than one and that type of stuff, right? Or third inner eyelids and different things with the biology. And like all of that is cool, right? Because it's all allegorical, because each of these races, comes from a different part of like human culture. But yeah, it's I do like that they did give a somewhat scientific in-universe explanation for it. So it is definitely a strong episode in that regard. But here, let's get to episode 21. Frame of mind. I can't believe this is the last one you watched, but yeah, here we go. Love this one. He says, wow, what an intense episode. Riker doesn't usually get as many centric episodes compared to some of the other characters on The Next Generation, but this one, Frame of Mind, is easily his best. Oh, yes, it is. He says it's filled with tension and psychological horror to the point where it genuinely made me question what was real and what wasn't. Of course, I knew Riker wasn't actually crazy or imagining his time on the Enterprise, but still, the way the episode is structured gets into your head. It disorients you on purpose. Yes, it does. It's so good. Frame of Mind is so good. He says Jonathan Frakes gives it one of his finest performances in the entire series here. You can really see how much pressure Riker is under, trying to hold on to his sense of reality as everything around him keeps shifting. He commits fully to Riker's descent into confusion and fear, and his performance carries the entire episode. This isn't the usual confident first-in-command, charming Riker we're used to. This is Riker stripped of control, stripped of clarity, and still fighting to get out. One of the things I appreciated most was how cleverly the episode used the stage play within the story. Riker is rehearsing a scene where he plays a man accused of a crime and imprisoned in an asylum, only for that fictional setting to suddenly become his reality. The line between acting and truth begins to blur not just for him, but for us as viewers. It raises fascinating questions. How much of our sense of reality is built on repetition, routine, or performance? In a way, the play becomes a metaphor for his mental prison. Yes, and the play, of course, is called Frame of Mind. He says the structure of the episode is genius. It leans into psychological horror in a way TNG rarely does. The lighting, the surreal transitions, the fluid but jarring scene changes between the asylum, the stage, and the Enterprise evoke a dreamlike logic that creates a constant sense of unease. At times, it felt like I was watching an episode of The Twilight Zone or even something like Jacob's Ladder. That creeping disorientation where you start to question everything right along with Riker is one of the episode's biggest strengths. Frame of Mind also works on a deeper level as a metaphor for psychological trauma or PTSD, he says. Riker is literally tortured and manipulated through his own mind. His struggle to piece together what's real reflects a very human fear. What if I lose myself? What if no one believes me? That fear of being gaslit or mentally overwhelmed is incredibly relatable. The fact that he doesn't just push through it, but breaks down and still claws his way back to clarity, that's a different kind of strength we don't often get to see in him. In short, Amr says Frame of Mind is one of TNG's most unique and ambitious episodes. It's not just a sci-fi story, it's a character study, a psychological thriller, and a deep dive into identity, perception, and resilience. Definitely a standout and definitely an underrated classic. One of my favorite scenes from this episode, Amr, is at the very end where he insists that even though Beverly tells him that they were going to tear the set down tomorrow, he insists on tearing down the set from the Frame of Mind play himself by hand. And that's how the episode ends, is you see him ripping up that scene, ripping up that whole, the set design is like, nah, he can't go to sleep knowing that it's still there. He's out, he's in the real world, everything is cool, he's, you know, it's all set, but his, like the ordeal that he just went through will not allow him to rest comfortably unless that damn scene, that damn set is torn down. It has to be deconstructed. It has to be gone. He has to kill it, essentially, before he can rest. I love that part of the episode. It's the tail end of it. But yeah, it's a great character study for Riker. It's arguably the strongest Riker episode in the entire series. And there's some strong ones. There are definitely some strong ones. But Jonathan Frakes, absolutely, his full acting chops were on display in this particular episode. Very, very well done. Amr says, well, that's everything. I think this is yet another Dorsey-sized email from me. As always, I hope you've enjoyed reading through it and hope those tuning in also enjoyed listening to it. Thanks as always for taking the time to read through my thoughts. It really means a lot. I hope you're doing well and in good health and spirits, and the same goes for anyone else tuning in. I am sending good vibes your way. Until next time, live long and prosper. Sincerely, Amr Osama. Amr, thank you for the kind words. Thank you for the feedback. We are also sending the good vibes and safety your way as well in your part of the world. We could all use a little bit of that, no doubt about it. But yeah, no, it's thank you for sharing your thoughts. Thank you for sharing your feedback. Yes, it is Dorsey sized, and you and John have effectively taken up the first 2 hours of feedback, but it is what it is. It's introspective and fun discourse to have about all this stuff, whether it is, Sinners, like you said, you first watched that, or Ironheart, and certainly the Star Trek stuff for sure, man. And I'm definitely open door here, right? As far as, trying to get everybody's thoughts out and really like dive deep into some awesome discussion, as again, the center of it is movies, TV, and other sort of media, and how it affects our lives and how it affects us at the core of it. So thank you for sharing, and thank you for the great insight that you've provided so far into Star Trek TNG. All right, so the rest of the show is a couple of shorter emails. First off, from Alex De Silva. This one's called Flight Chat number 8, Heart of Iron, Skin of Charmin. Oh, wonder who he's talking about here. He says, hey Ray, I'd like to start just by giving thanks to everyone for the well wishes on my baby. Thank you to Jared, Wally, Amr, and anyone else I might have missed. It's been crazy, but well worth it. She's 5 weeks old now, and while I am really excited for her to be old enough for us to enjoy geeky things together, I'm just trying to cherish these moments with her as a newborn. I hear you on that. Yes, indeed. Congratulations again on being a father, Alex. He says, something I've noticed is that ever since I became a dad, I've become incredibly sensitive to anything in movies or TV that involves fathers and daughters. Here's a prime example. My wife and I recently watched the Cheaper by the Dozen movies from about 2 decades ago starring Steve Martin. There's a moment in the second movie where Martin's tween-age daughter is getting ready to go on a date, and he sees her after she's put her makeup on and gotten all pretty, and he has a moment just realizing, wow, that's my little girl growing up. Dude, I was a mess at that scene. The tears were flowing freely down my face because all I could think about is when my own little girl goes through that same moment. You know what? Not being a father, I mean, I understand. I've had fathers tell me this. Like your perception changes, and plenty of people have said this. Your perception changes once you have a child. With respect to any of the stuff that we watch, right? And I've never seen the Cheaper by the Dozen movies, but I know what they're about. It'll probably be the same if you watch Father with the Bride, Father of the Bride, rather, which is also, I mean, that's a remake in itself. But Steve Martin, I think, was in that remake. I think, pretty sure that was him. I remember Martin Short being in it too. But either way, yeah, no, I wouldn't surprise me if you have more of those moments, sappy moments with respect to father-daughter stuff with some other things that you watch going forward here, Alex. But he says, all right, let's move on to something much less sappy, horror movies. Oh, yeah, we're talking horror movies today. All right. He said there was talk on Flight Chat recently about elevated horror movies. I recently watched Companion, which I think would be right up your alley. He says it's speculative sci-fi horror movie that is very light on horror and heavy on plot and commentary. I don't want to say too much about it because this is one of those movies where it's really rewarding going into it blind. There are no jump scares or nightmare inducing sequences, so I think you'd really enjoy this flick. The scariest part about it is that it presents a technological prospect that we might actually see during our lifetime. Okay, so Companion is on my radar, Alex. It is one that I definitely want to watch, not for the least of which is because Jack Quaid is in it, if I remember correctly. I have no idea who the actress is that is in it, but it does look like it's up my alley. I've seen a couple of things about it, like no major introspective pieces or anything, but just, I've seen a few things, some ads, some TV spots that lead me to believe, yeah, you know what? I might be interested in seeing that. So yeah, Companion definitely is on my radar. Thank you for bringing that one up. He says another movie I recently watched for the first time is Mrs. Doubtfire. Being a Robin Williams movie, I was expecting a lot of comedy, but I wasn't prepared for how much heart this was going to have. This was another movie where I had to bite my lip during any scene where Williams' character was having a heartfelt interaction with his daughters on screen. Yep, yeah. Mrs. Doubtfire is an emotional movie. It is. And what I really like about Mrs. Doubtfire, because that was a movie that we saw early on, like we had that on VHS, and because we love Robin Williams. Robin Williams is amazing. May he rest in peace. But like that movie is definitely, I mean, it's got comedic turns, but it definitely has way more heart and tells a real story. And I don't mean just a real story in terms of how much heart it has, but also in terms of how it ends. Because the reality of the situation is in Hollywood, they'd give you the Hollywoodized ending, and spoilers for anybody that hasn't seen Mrs. Doubtfire. Spoilers, spoilers. I know it's 30 years old, but whatever. The Hollywood ending is that they would get back together. The Hollywood ending is that they would be a happy family together again. He'd remarry Sally Field and they'd be all great together. But no, the ending is like real because he doesn't get custody of his kids back. She gets full custody of her kids and he's devastated and destroyed. But he's got this job now as Doubtfire and she goes to visit him. And after they find out that he's turned it into a TV series, and they come to an agreement where he's going to take the kids for a few hours every day after school. And it's not a case where the family lives happily ever after altogether again. It's a very real case of, okay, no, we're still divorced. Mom and dad still have the differences, but I'm not going to keep the family away from their father. If the father wants to be a part of their lives, which he desperately wanted to be a part of their lives from the beginning, then she's not going to take that away from him. So it was that understanding. And there's a lot of scenarios where that's not the case, where it's a lot more, argumentative and a lot more destructive than what is in this movie. So maybe that part of it is Hollywoodized, but just the idea that it wasn't going to be the happily ever after ending where the family gets back together. It was going to be the real ending of, all right, look, mom and dad aren't getting back together, but dad is still going to be a part of the children's lives, right? And just the way that movie ends, it's a very emotional ending and it's a very real ending in that regard. Like, because a lot of families, that's how they end up in that regard. And maybe it is the more Hollywood version of the real ending, but it's still a real ending and not the happily ever after, quite so much happily ever after I think we're kind of conditioned to seeing with movies like this. So yeah, Mrs. Doubtfire in many ways was ahead of its time, even for early to mid 90s when it came out. So yeah, that's definitely a much more emotional movie than people might realize before watching it. He says, next, I watched Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. You'd be surprised how much time you have for movies and stuff when you're at home with a newborn. Oh no, I could see that because you got to be on guard. You can't really do a whole lot of anything else other than be in the house. He says, I came to the realization that I really like this movie. There were so many great suspenseful scenes, and the Indoraptor is a great monster villain. The thing is genuinely scary whenever it's on screen, he says. I also appreciate this movie for being bold enough to try something completely new in the series. We're on the island for less than half the movie, and the creepy gothic setting of the manor works for me. The score in these scenes sounds like something you could hear in a classic Batman movie. And then there's the ending, he says. It has real stakes that go beyond just the characters escaping the area with their lives. The events of this movie truly changed the landscape of the world, and I like how Fallen Kingdom swung for the fences like that. All right. Okay, and then he says, and finally, I watched Jurassic World Dominion, which I think you haven't seen yet, so I'll keep thoughts spoiler free. No, that is the one I have not watched yet. He says Dominion is definitely the weakest of the Jurassic World trilogy, but not the weakest of the overall Jurassic series. Dominion has plenty of cool moments. I watched the extended version on Peacock, which actually adds a lot of cool stuff that makes this movie much more cohesive than the theatrical cut, with a surprisingly immersive new prologue. He says, now that I finished revisiting the Jurassic series, here's my current ranking. Okay, so Alex's ranking. Number 1, Jurassic Park. Number 2, Jurassic World. Number 3, Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. That high? Really? You've got it third? Okay, intriguing. Number 4, Jurassic Park 3. Number 5, Jurassic World Dominion. And number 6, The Lost World Jurassic Park. Okay. Alex says, I don't despise The Lost World. It has some cool sequences, but it's definitely the one I feel most bored by while watching. The fact that you have it ranked number 1 in the series is utter crazy talk. Well, that's rude. That's rude of you, Alex. You don't have to call it crazy talk. You can disagree with it in that regard. I mean, yes, you have it last, and that's fine. That's your business. I have my list, you have yours. So, we can leave it at that. He says, also, in this most recent marathon, I think I enjoyed Jurassic World and Fallen Kingdom just about equally. Both were a blast, and I wouldn't be surprised if I swapped the two in a future ranking. See, if I wanted to be rude and say anything was crazy talk, I'd call that crazy talk, personally. But I do have to revisit Fallen Kingdom. But just in retrospect, I remember liking Jurassic World a hell of a lot more than Fallen Kingdom. And it is intriguing. I'm going to be nicer than you. It's intriguing that Fallen Kingdom is that high on your list. I'll put it that way. He says, I have no idea when or if I'll even be able to make it to the theater for Rebirth, so I'll likely have to wait for it to drop on Peacock. Looking forward to it. All right, here's what I'm going to do. Because, of course, Jurassic World Rebirth is out this Friday, and I do want to see it. So, what I'm going to do is, I've said I need to rewatch Fallen Kingdom and give it another shot, and I need to watch Jurassic World Dominion. I have all of the movies. I will rewatch, though. I rewatch Fallen Kingdom and watch Dominion this week. I'll post flight reviews of them up on Patreon. I'll do that. That's what this week's Patreon is going to be. I will postpone my other plan that I was going to do for flight review on Patreon for another week or so, and I will make this Jurassic Week, because it is Jurassic Week technically, right? Regardless of what we've seen of marketing, regardless of what some early thoughts I've heard about Rebirth from people who have been at press screenings and whatnot, that I don't need to divulge necessarily. But yeah, I'll make this a Jurassic Week. In addition to watching Ironheart, because I got to watch that on Wednesday as well. But either way, Jurassic Week, I'll talk about Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. I'll rewatch that, and I'll see if I can figure out why Alex has it rated third, in his regard. And then I will watch Dominion and see if I agree that it should be ranked fifth. I'll do my own ranking with respect to this and see, now I'm prompted. Do I watch all of them? Maybe I could marathon them. I don't know. That might not be a bad idea. It's only 6 movies. I could do it. If I time it properly, if I manage my time properly, I might be able to do it. All right, we'll see. Challenge accepted. But either way, let's get to the rest of Alex's email. He says, and now my thoughts on Ironheart. All right, what does he have to say about Ironheart? He says, I haven't been keeping up with much of the discourse around this show, but I can imagine why many people are review bombing it. Those people aren't worth my time to comment on, so I'll move on to my spoiler thoughts. I'll start with the negatives. All right, let's see if his negatives match any of what the review bombers are saying. First, he says, I despise the Hood's crime gang. They're all annoying, obnoxious characters, and every time they're on screen, I want to groan, and I have to fight the urge just to pick up my phone. That's it for his negatives. Okay. He didn't say, he didn't go further. He just said annoying, obnoxious characters, and he doesn't like seeing them on screen. Okay. If that is the extent of your complaint about the Hood's crime gang, all right. I can work with that. I can see that because you didn't go further. And not that I think Alex would go further into the bigoted reasons that people have to dislike the Hood's crime gang. I don't think he would go that far whatsoever. I'm just saying that's where he's at as far as like he doesn't like their sentimentalities. Okay, I get that. Understandable. All right, and I'm making this clarification because I've been very clear about me being a lot more critical of people's negativity with respect to Ironheart for a lot of those social political reasons, if you will. But that's all he went with. So that's all his negatives because now he says, and now the positives. Okay, he says I'm digging the story. I wasn't expecting Riri to have to link up with the bad guys. The mission in the third episode was downright suspenseful at times, but man, I had no sympathy whatsoever for John or whatever the Hood's brother's name was. Yeah, it was John. After he discovered Riri took part of Parker's cloak, I was like, all right, come on, Natalie, make it quick. And John's death by suffocation? Good riddance. Well, the show did try to give you some empathy for John, but I could totally understand based on what he had done prior to that scene where, yeah, good riddance. No, I get it. I mean, I didn't feel that much sympathy for him, truthfully. He was trying to take Riri out. And, there was that one scene where he smashed the one girl, clown, where he smashed her face into the table or to the desk or wherever when she was playing around with the Hood. It was like, yeah, he went too far. I agree. He went too far. So I don't have that much sympathy for him either in that regard. But Alex says, I like Xavier's character. He brings a calm, level-headed demeanor that benefits the show. I also like Alden Ehrenreich's character. His dynamic with Riri is fun, and I enjoyed how she encouraged him to stand up for himself more. I was not expecting the Stain reveal, but it makes sense in an Iron-related project like this one. Yes, I forgot. More spoilers. Spoilers. Ironheart spoilers. Sorry, apologize for that. Anyway, he asks, are you a big book reader at all? Do books make it onto your list, or is the list reserved for on-screen entertainment? The reason he's asking this is because I've been reading Shogun, he says, which is an absolutely massive epic story with a huge cast. In total, the book is around 1,500 pages. I can't wait to eventually check out the show. If it's anything like the book, it's going to be amazing. It's a great story with lots of political intrigue, action, and character drama. Great stuff. Once I finish Shogun, he says I'm going to check out the Star Wars Aftermath trilogy, which is set between episodes 6 and 7, and sets up the sequel trilogy. I've heard good things about Aftermath. I'm also planning on doing a full rewatch of The Mandalorian before the movie next year, so it'll be fun to read Cobb Vanth's first appearance in the books before seeing him in season 2 of the show. Yeah, I won't say that books aren't on the list, but I will say that I don't want to add too much more to the damn list. I mean, I mentioned earlier that I do want to read Superman for All Seasons and All-Star Superman before watching Superman next week. So I've got a week of time to read those comics, right? So it's not just books, it's also comics. And as far as books are concerned, man, I don't know where to begin because there's a whole lot of books that I would like to read. Old school science fiction literature from the likes of Octavia Butler and Samuel Delany and a number of others. Also, there's some Asimov I've never read. There's some William Gibson I've never read. There's some Philip K. Dick novels that I've never read. There's a lot of stuff that I would like to read. There actually really is. There's a whole lot that I would like to read. And I need to just buckle down and sometimes just turn the damn TV off and read. I need to do that. Shonda does that. I need to do that, truthfully, because there's a lot of shit that I would actually really like to read, to be honest with you. So, to answer your question, yes, I would like to add books to the list. I'm just trying to figure out exactly how the hell I'm going to do that. He says, one random thing about Mass Effect Andromeda that I missed from the original trilogy, here we're talking video games here for a second, is that you're no longer able to use your squad mates' powers on demand. In combat, they're now entirely independent. The only feature that remained the same is that you're still able to direct them to go where you want them to, but I rarely see the need to ever use this feature. So yeah, Alex brought up last week that he's gotten back into Mass Effect Andromeda for the Xbox One. So yeah, that's where those are his thoughts with respect to that. And it's been a minute since I played Andromeda, so I don't remember that. But I do remember that was an ability that I didn't use. I don't want to say I used it a ton when I played through Mass Effect. I used it more when I played the Legendary Edition, but I remember my first playthroughs of the game, I didn't really use it a whole lot. So whether or not I miss it or not in Andromeda, I don't know. I'd have to see about that, but either way. Then he asks, have you ever gone to one of those 4D theaters where the seat moves, you get sprayed with smells and water droplets, etc.? Years ago, I went with my dad to watch Pirates of the Caribbean Dead Men Tell No Tales, and we went to a 4D showing. I remember there was a guy seated in front of me who had a tray of chicken fingers, and during one of the movie's extended action sequences, I was just dying laughing because the guy kept getting thrown around in his seat whenever he tried to eat his chicken. He eventually gave up on trying to eat it and instead just held on dearly to the tray as he continued to get bounced around. Um, so no, I have not been to a 4D theater. I am curious about it. I would like to go to a 4D theater and see something. I don't know where there are any in our area. Like here, I'm curious now. Let me briefly Google that. Are there any 4D theaters in Michigan? I'm sure there are, but hang on. Well, unfortunately, no, there aren't, because apparently, according to Google, the theater chain that is primarily associated with 4DX is Regal, and there aren't any. Not in the state of Michigan. Like, I'm looking at all these 4DX locations, and I think the closest one, yeah, the closest one apparently, according to this, is Illinois. Is there one in Ohio? Ohio would technically be closer. No, there aren't any in Ohio, according to this list. And I'm at the Regal Movies website looking at this list directly. Now I know that my sister who lives out in California, I know she's been to it before. And they got plenty in California. I mean, California is a massive state. But yeah, there are none here. There are none in Michigan. So no, I mean I've never been to one and I won't be able to go to one unless they bring any here or unless I go to any outside of Michigan. Now, it does say that apparently AMC is going to be bringing 4DX to some of their movie screens or to some of their theaters across the country. I don't know if any of them will be here in Michigan. We have plenty of AMCs in Michigan, but no, that I have not had any local ability to go see a 4DX movie. I would like to. I would be curious. You know, Superman would be a good one to see in 4DX, I would think, right? My sister told me that she saw the Batman in 4DX, now that I recall, and she said that was a crazy experience. But I also wouldn't order food. Ordering food in a movie theater is fine, but not for an interactive experience that's going to be tossing you all about and like squirting water or spraying water and stuff on you and smells and all that. No, I would not do that. I would not order food or even popcorn for a 4DX experience. There's no way, because even if I do get a chance to eat it, I might choke on it, right? You know, depending on how I'm getting jostled and that kind of thing. So yeah, it doesn't seem like it's very safe to try and do that. So yeah. Anyway, how about this? He says Sonequa Martin Green plays a really funny, crazy character on New Girl, which makes me excited to eventually get to Star Trek Discovery one day. New Girl was my first exposure to her. I'd imagine her character on Discovery isn't quite as much of a clown as she is in New Girl, but I like what I see of her acting abilities so far. You're talking about the sitcom? Sonequa Martin Green was in the New Girl sitcom, the one with Zoe Deschanel. Hang on. Well, okay, I learned something new. I've seen New Girl, but I haven't watched it like religiously. It's not a sitcom that I've ever like dove into. I've seen the Prince episode of New Girl. That's the extent of a full New Girl episode that I've ever watched. But apparently, yeah, she plays a character named Rhonda, Winston Bishop's ex-wife on the show. She was in 2 episodes. Okay. I was not aware of that whatsoever. My first exposure to Sonequa Martin Green was Star Trek Discovery, right? So, not even Walking Dead, because I know a lot of people that know her as Sasha from Walking Dead as well. So, yeah, intriguing. I learned something new. Did not even know she was a new girl. All right, thank you for that. I agree. Her acting abilities are phenomenal. But of course, I unapologetically love Star Trek Discovery and what she does as Michael Burnham in Star Trek Discovery. So I'm biased, but I don't care. It is what it is. So, all right. He says, this week for The Next Generation, I watched Hollow Pursuits. He says Patrick Stewart feels made for this Three Musketeers type of role. He has both the voice and the look to pull it off well. Well, yeah. I mean, come on. He's a Shakespearean trained thespian. Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. So he certainly fits that well. He asks, so did Barclay actually leave at the end? When he told the computer to erase all of his programs except Program 9, is Program 9 the farewell message? Him not being able to get over his social anxiety to say goodbye to the crew in person feels like a lack of character development. He didn't really change at the end from how he started, given that he had to say goodbye in the holodeck. I will disagree with that. I mean, if I'm reading what you're writing, like if I'm reading this the right way, Alex, it sounds like you're saying that he was saying goodbye to the ship. No, he's not saying goodbye to the ship. He's remaining on the ship. He's saying goodbye to the holodeck. So he's not, the farewell message is not for the crew. He's staying aboard the Enterprise. He's going to remain a part of the USS Enterprise, right? He's saying goodbye to the holodeck characters. He's saying goodbye to everybody in the holodeck. That's what he's saying goodbye to, right? I think you might have misconstrued that one, Alex. He's not saying goodbye to the crew. He's saying goodbye to the personifications of them in the holodeck. I think you missed the boat on that one. But he does say the concept of holodiction is a scary prospect. Do you think that we might see something like the holodeck in our lifetime? If so, I could definitely see people wanting to escape their real lives and just get lost in the virtual augmented world a la Ready Player One. Oh yeah. Oh, yeah, I mean, come on, look at the Google goggles and all the other the VR stuff. Absolutely, yes. I mean, I don't know if it's ever going to get to like like the room, like where it's like a holodeck environment where it's as expansive and matter is created. Like I don't know how long it's going to take before we get to that, but I definitely think that Ready Player One is very possible, extremely possible in that regard, and it's very similar to that. It's just all digital in that regard. There isn't necessarily a physical place, physical room to walk into in that one. He says next episode is called The Most Toys. Oh yes, Kivas Fajo. That'll be an intriguing one, indeed, for sure. Live long and prosper, Alex. He says, Alex, thank you for the insight. Indeed, I'll let you know if you're not on the Patreon. I'll try and let you know what I thought of Fallen Kingdom and Dominion going forward, and then hopefully get to Rebirth at the end of this week because I'm gonna make it Jurassic Week and see if I can get through all the Jurassic movies. That'll be a challenge, most certainly this week, especially with Ironheart in the middle of the week. Have to take a break on that or figure out how to pull that off as well. But either way, looking forward to more of the feedback. And as always, take care of the family. Hope you and everyone is doing well on your end, good sir. And finally, we'll close out this episode with Jared Cardos. His email this week, he says, Hey Ray, hope you're doing well. Here are my thoughts on your past couple of episodes, probably. He says a couple of things from the chat. Since you mentioned me by name with having some light nags over Superman's My Greatest Strength line in one of the promos, I feel the need to explain a little further. All right. Wasn't dragging you for it, Jared. It's a difference of opinion. But he says, to be clear, I think the statement is true for Superman. His humanity is his greatest strength. And I like that Clark is seemingly trying to shove into Lex's hater mind the fact that he is more human than alien. I think I blanched a bit at the greatest strength because partly because it felt like it was telling when the movie should and probably will show that. That being said, considering how that was a large scene with the Snyder movies and their fanboys talking about that iteration like he's just a bleach job away from Homelander, maybe they do need to say it as explicitly as possible. Also, I have to remember that these lines tend to sound a lot better in context, so it's very possible that I'll have a bite of crow by the time the credits are rolling. It is possible, but I would also say this, Jared, like, when watching trailer lines, there's a lot of splicing that happens. Like they take lines from other lines and put them together for a line that fits the trailer, right? So whatever he's actually saying, whatever he's actually monologuing could be slightly different than what we heard in the trailer for that particular sequence. So, I don't think that's something that anybody can be blamed for. Trailers are not designed to necessarily, they're not going to give you full context. They're going to give you the context of, hey, what's going on, just to give you a tone and an idea of what to expect in the film, to get you hyped up, to give you the quick hits, if you will. But I do agree with you, truthfully, that based on how many fans, just completely missed the humanity that, Henry Cavill's Superman had in the Zack Snyder trilogy, that perhaps James Gunn does feel the need to spell it out in dialogue. Yeah, no, I agree with that. I actually quite agree with that. And it is something that I've seen James Gunn do in his films. And I know there are plenty of people that don't like that, don't care for it, but I also understand where sometimes the audience does need stuff to be spelled out for them, right? So that's one of those cases where I talked about earlier about how people think the audience is dumb, right? It's not that the audience is dumb in terms of like continuity and connection. They don't care about that, right? It's whatever. We're overthinking it with respect to that. But sometimes when it comes to, something that you want to portray with a character, you do have to say it out loud. You do have to spell it out in dialogue. They do need the character to say it, because then they can say, well, no, he says that's his greatest strength, right? So it would not surprise me one bit if James Gunn did that intentionally for that reason, to dispel any notion of what he is doing in that regard. One of the things that I really like, and I'm going to bring this up, because I watched the CBS Sunday Morning interview that he did, that he and David Cornswet did, and one of the things that I really like that may, Jared, yourself, Anthony, Phil, number of you may like this, is he talked about how in Superman, like with respect to Superman 78, he was talking about how his Superman definitely gets hurt and damaged, and that's something that a lot of the fanboys have been complaining about lately, right? But he said he didn't want one that would be able to punch a planet in half or be all powerful. And one of the examples that he mentioned was he didn't want a Superman that could spin around the world a bunch of times and turn back time. He didn't want that. He wanted the Superman to be a little different than that. I appreciated that. I did. I appreciated that he said that, because to me, it just further signifies how I don't believe this Superman is going to be Donner-esque. I don't. I think Gunn Superman is going to be significantly different from Richard Donner's interpretation with Christopher Reeve. I think it's going to be different from Zack Snyder's interpretation with Henry Cavill, but I think it's going to take beats from both. There's going to be similarities, but there's going to be enough differences that it's not going to quite be exactly the Superman, the movie Redux from 1978, like a lot of the anti-Snyders are hoping and praying for, right? And they will delusionally ignore it. Some of them will, others won't. And there'll be certain things like his screaming and the emotional stuff that they're just not going to be able to get past. And they're going to dive further into cult land when they do that. But either way, we're a week away from finding all that out. Continuing with Jared's email, he says, during Amar's Trek talk, you were both wondering about the choice to have Troy to go into the more standard Starfleet uniform, so I decided to look around for it, and I found this quote from Marina Sirtis, apparently from a BBC interview in 2001. The quote is, I was thrilled when I got my regulation Starfleet uniform, or the regulation spacesuit as we call it. First of all, it covered up my cleavage, and consequently, I got all my brains back. Because when you have a cleavage, you can't have brains in Hollywood. So I got all my brains back, and I was allowed to do things that I hadn't been allowed to do for 5 or 6 years. I went on away teams. I was in charge of staff. I had my pips back. I had phasers. I had all the equipment again, and it was fabulous. I was absolutely thrilled, end quote. Jared says, so I get the feeling that if it wasn't something she was asking for, she definitely enjoyed the change in direction that yielded, and I totally get it. While she definitely had her strong moments before then, her focused episodes did have a tendency to play on her looks and sex appeal as much as her personality and what she brings to the crew, especially in the early seasons. And I think it largely worked because some of her best moments are in the later seasons, movies, and subsequent appearances in other shows. Jared, you bring up something that I didn't necessarily bring up when Amr brought it up last week, but I can talk about it now since you brought it front and center. Yeah, that's the thing. And the fans have definitely observed that Troy's character was not written with quite the amount of depth that you would want a character like that to be written with in the early going. Yeah, it was very much sex appeal. It was very much how her body was accentuated, not just in terms of that jumpsuit and the hair, but also in terms of the dress. And they made her look as effeminate as possible and as attractive as possible for eye candy. They did. They absolutely did. And they didn't give her the greatest of depth in terms of storylines and in terms of things to do early on. And that doesn't mean that she didn't have great character moments. She most certainly did. But you're right that some of her stronger character moments and some of her stronger episodes absolutely happen later in the show, and certainly happen after she gets her uniform. And I completely understand. And that's something that, I haven't, it's been a minute. I've seen so many interviews with Marina Sirtis and so many interviews with the cast and crew and whatnot, and she's absolutely talked about it before, and she's been in different parts of the spectrum with respect to her being a sex symbol on Star Trek, right? She's been parts where she was excited about it, and then she's been parts where, she hated how dumbed down it was, right? She's been all over the spectrum, as she is allowed to be with it, truthfully. But yeah, as far as the uniform change signifying more depth and more weight for Troy's character later on, yes, absolutely. And she's right, and that's something that Amr will see, going forward. You see more of her in the uniform in the later seasons. You see more of the responsibility that she takes and is given in these later episodes. Absolutely. Completely agree. So yes, there's definitely, it's a give and take with respect to that particular aspect. Thank you for bringing that up. So continuing, he says, with Alex's email talking about Mass Effect Andromeda, I will say that as someone who's played through it a few times, it's definitely improved than what it was at launch. Oh, that's good to hear. And honestly, it didn't have a lot of bugs even then, he says. The worst I had was that at one point a cutscene didn't load right, so the camera was in weird angles and everyone was in T poses, but I was able to reload and fix it. But most of the work in fixing it was in cutscenes and facial animations because I believe a lot of those weren't working at launch, but they've been touched up and look a lot better. Honestly, probably not as good as the trilogy, especially 3, but it gets the job done. He says, overall, I do think Andromeda is a bit overhated, as there is done some good stuff there. It feels like if the first Mass Effect was made in the 2010s, which, if that makes sense. Yeah, I get that. I do understand that. He says there's a lot of great action and exploration. The companions are at least interesting, and while the story hits a lot of the same notes as the first game, it did make me want to find out more about the Helios cluster and the Andromeda galaxy. It's not without its flaws. I didn't care for how it took away the ability to really pause and give orders to squad mates. That Alex just brought that up in his previous email. He said they tried to make it that the AI would be able to react to what you're doing and act well on their own, but it only works some of the time. But that's something that could have been refined or just brought back in a future game. Sadly, it's unlikely that we'll ever see a direct sequel, but the people making the next Mass Effect game have hinted that the Andromeda Galaxy will play a role, and I'm definitely looking forward to it. Yep, fingers crossed on that one. But yeah, graphically speaking, I can't say I remember a ton of times where it glitched necessarily, and I think you're right. Like a lot of the glitchier stuff, like when we played it at launch, had to do with the cutscenes and whatnot. But I mean, that was 7, 8 years ago, right? That was 2017, 2018. This is when Shonda got her Xbox One. So yeah, it's got to be refined now. It's got to be in a much different, much better place now, graphically speaking. So yeah, I would like to revisit that game at some point. We've still got it. We've still got her Xbox One copy, so we'll have to check that out. Does it upconvert? Like, does it play on the Series X? I don't remember. But either way, no. You know what? It's also downloadable on the Series X. That's right, because I did download it like a year or so ago on the Series X, and I played through a little bit of it. Not as much as I played it originally when we first had it, but yeah, need to dive back into that at some point. All right, Jared says, as for the talk that's come along with the Clayface casting, first off, I like the actor they got for the role, he says. I only know him from his episode of Doctor Who, but he was good in that. As for all the fan hand-wringing about what this means with Gunn has talked about, as I recall, he said that the actors will reprise their main characters in the DCU in live action, and while Tudyk voiced Clayface in Creature Commandos, his main character is Dr. Phosphorus. This might be light spoilers, but if flashbacks to Phosphorus before he was all phosphorus, he looks just like Tudyk. And even if Tudyk was the main actor for Clayface, that doesn't necessarily mean there can't be others. You'd be surprised how many iterations of Clayface there have been. But all that said, it's likely the new guy is just playing the same character as the one in Creature Commandos, and most people won't know or even care that someone else played him first. Yes, exactly. It's a fan complaint. I completely agree with you. It's absolutely a fan complaint in that regard. And Alan Tudyk, somebody posted a clip on Threads yesterday. I did not know how many damn DC characters Alan Tudyk has played and or voiced. I knew about Mr. Nobody. I knew about Clayface. Because he plays a version of Clayface in Harley Quinn, right? Not just Creature Commandos, but also in Harley Quinn, right? He plays the Joker in Harley Quinn. Like, but he's Green Arrow? When the hell was he Green Arrow? I didn't know that, right? And then the Dr. Phosphorus thing as well in Creature Commandos, which I still need to flip and watch. Can I get that watched before Superman? I'm going to try. I'm going to try and watch that. I'm going to try and binge that before Superman. Because Scott and I, sadly, I never got a hold of him. We never got a chance to talk about that on DC TV Squadcast. I blame myself because work just got busy and I never got through the show. I never watched it, even though he did. So that was kind of the beginning of the end for Squadcast Media in that regard. So we've never talked about that show. But yeah, let me see if I can watch that. But yeah, Alan Tudyk is like a DC veteran as far as voice acting and acting in that regard. So yeah, he can do whatever the hell he wants as far as I'm concerned. I mean, come on. He's Superman Robot 4 in the movie, and then he's probably gonna, like you said, probably play Dr. Phosphorus like later on if Dr. Phosphorus shows up in live action in the DCU. So I hear you. He has cemented work with James Gunn and DC Studios in the DCU proper if it succeeds the way that we're hoping it does. So yeah, there we go with that. And speaking of things Gunn has said, Jared says, on to your latest cast with some more interesting things to talk about. And this goes back to, I talked about James Gunn's Entertainment Weekly exclusive interview. Jared says, first, I like the idea of previously on the DCU tags before the shows. I think it might help mitigate the sort of homework problem that the MCU has been plagued with. Marvel does yet to mitigate this with their Legends shorts on YouTube and Disney+, but I think having it at the front of the shows might help more. Yes, but I will also say, Jared, that the homework problem, I do think, while I agree that it's there for the MCU, I do still firmly believe, just in the last couple of years of talking to people in the general audience, they care about it a lot less than we thought they do, or that we think they do in that regard. So there is that to consider as well. But he also says, and while I'm talking about things at the front of DC Studios projects, it didn't occur to me until now that there wouldn't be a WB logo. But like you said, we don't get the Disney logo before a Marvel Studios film. That's going to feel a little weird, but a good type of weird. Oh, I'm looking forward to it. I'm very much looking forward to it because that was something I had to think about too, Jared. I was like, wait a minute. We don't get Disney logos at the beginning of Marvel films. We don't. We do not. There are no Disney logos before it, right? It is Marvel Studios, and so it'll be the same, be the exact same. And again, this just further goes into my dream being realized of DC Studios being its own autonomous entity out from underneath the grip of Warner Brothers Picture Group. I love it. Can't wait to see that in a week. It's going to be amazing. All right, Jared says the detail about a dangerous actor trying to pitch something to Gunn is very intriguing. My guess is Michael B. Jordan, he says. Remember, he's been attached to in the past as a producer for a Static Shock movie and an HBO Max Val Zod Superman miniseries, and after the success of Sinners, who wouldn't describe Jordan as a big time actor? But that's just my guess. For all we know, it could be someone I've forgotten or someone we've never heard about. You know what? I'm kind of hoping it's Michael B. Jordan because I tell you what, he would be phenomenal to bring into the DCU without question. I mean, not just because he's a big time actor, but you know that he would do the role justice, whether it is Static Shock, whether it is Val Zod. Probably not Val Zod. Probably wouldn't be anything like that with respect to Superman, but any character that he could bring life to in the DCU from that perspective, you know, he would have been a great John Stewart. Listen, I'm looking forward to what Aaron Pierre does as John Stewart because you know I'm an Aaron Pierre fan from his days as Dev M in Krypton. So I think he's going to be awesome with Kyle Chandler. But Michael B. Jordan, yes, I hope so. Fingers crossed. I really hope that that's who it is, and I hope it works out, truthfully. I would love to see Michael B. Jordan in the DCU. He's already made his mark on the MCU as Killmonger, and what an indelible mark he has made. It'd be great to bring him in to the DCU and have, you know what? How about have that film directed, maybe not by Ryan Coogler, although that'd be great, but he's pretty much cemented in Marvel. I totally understand that. But how about Ava DuVernay? How about that, Ava DuVernay? Have her resurrect some things and become part of the DC fold, right? Tom King's still involved. We know Tom King is involved. The Mr. Miracle animated series has been greenlit. It's coming to fruition. It's part of DC Studios. So yeah, there's a whole lot of possibilities here. I'm not gonna dream too hard, but I like where your head is at on that, Jared. I do. He says, and since I'm already guessing, I have something for this next project that Gunn is describing, which might feature Superman but isn't a sequel. At first, I was thinking it was some sort of team-up movie with Superman in it, but now I'm wondering if it might be a Lois Lane and/or Jimmy Olsen story. It would fit the parameters of what Gunn was saying and would definitely be different from the usual comic book movies being made. Both characters have had their own stories in comics in the past, and I think both could headline their own movie or miniseries with the right story. So, I like that idea, Jared. My question is, can you get the general audience to buy into it? Can you get the general audience to go see it in the theaters? Or is this something for HBO Max? Which I don't know. I mean, Zaslav, didn't he make it clear a couple years ago that he wants movies made theatrically in that regard, right? I don't know. Like a miniseries, I could totally see that as well. But yeah, like as far as like a Jimmy Olsen or a Lois Lane movie, yeah, I would see it. I would watch it, and I think many of us would watch it. Just what type of sell job are you giving to the general audience? Is it purely going to be how they're shown here in Superman here in a week or so? Like, is it going to be that? Is that going to be your selling point for a Jimmy Olsen or Lois Lane film? It could be. I mean, I don't know. That's the only thing I would question is how do you sell a Lois Lane or Jimmy Olsen movie to the general audience? That's my only question with respect to that. I would see that movie. I would watch that movie, and it would be very different. And they have focused on Lois and Jimmy in their own books over the years, no doubt. And that would be very outside the box. But is it too outside the box for the general audience? I don't know. I honestly don't know. That'd be an interesting question to ask. And I think a lot of it that idea would largely depend on how well Superman does and how well people like Rachel Brosnahan's Lois Lane and Skylar Gisando's Jimmy Olsen. We'll see. We will find out very soon. We're getting closer. All right, now for Ironheart, Jared says. I enjoyed this first half, he says. It might be a little obvious given the name, but it really feels like a spiritual legacy or continuation with the Iron Man movies while doing it in its own way. Dominique Thorne has been great in the role of Riri. It's a role that could feel too abrasive if not done right, but she does a great job of making you want to root for her even when she's making some bad calls. I'm really looking forward to seeing how she gets out of this mess. Also really enjoying this dynamic with Riri and Natalie and what it says about loss rather, and what it means to be human. The crew that surrounds Hood each have their cool moments. The Hood also seems to be a pretty strong villain so far, and Ezekiel was a very interesting surprise. Spoilers, spoilers, spoilers. I keep forgetting about the spoiler warning. Anyway, he says, I feel like he could go either way in terms of being an ally or enemy. He was definitely a villain for Tony in the comics, but it could go another direction here. It could, potentially, but we'll see. Based on what happened in episode 3, he could absolutely be a villain. We'll see how it goes. He says, so yeah, overall, unless the second half really craps the bed, and I'm reasonably sure it won't, this will be a really solid miniseries. Then he says, oh man, I would ask if I'm that predictable with talking about where Natalie came from in the comics, but I know good and well I would have. But since you looked that part up, I'll add another fun fact. In the comics, Natalie wasn't her first seemingly human AI assistant. In her first adventures as Ironheart, she had an AI of Tony Stark at a time when Tony was indisposed after the events of Civil War II. Thinking about it, while skipping to Natalie makes perfect sense with this story, there's a part of me that would love to see some version of that with RDJ playing an AI Tony. With how Downey has been publicly supportive of Thorne, it would be fun to see their characters butt heads because you know they would. That would be funny. That would be cool. And it would also be a great, flip off to the haters and the racists and the bigots and the misogynists that have been using Tony Stark as a dog whistle to complain about the fact that you have a black woman at the helm of this show. Yeah, I would love that. I don't know if there are any plans to do that, but that would be great if they decided to. He says, as for the plane crash story to explain Obadiah's death, I'm pretty sure it was mentioned at the end of Iron Man as a story S.H.I.E.L.D. made up to explain everything, along with Iron Man being Tony's bodyguard, and I guess that was the only part that Tony ignored. But I think that's probably more than enough for me on this one. Looking forward to your future episodes. Jared, thank you for the feedback as always, and for the insight as always. And you're right. I mean, I think I can recall where that story was brought up, but of course, we're talking MCU movie 1. And don't get me wrong, I've seen it many times, but it's been a minute since I've seen it, so I certainly wouldn't necessarily remember that particular detail about it. But thank you for bringing that up because, yeah, that's most certainly where it came from indeed. And now everybody remembers, and Riri now knows the truth about what happened to Obadiah Stane in that regard. So thank you as always for the feedback, good sir. It is greatly appreciated. And that'll do it for this week's episode of Flight Chat. Thank you so much to all of you who sent in feedback this week. This week it was just John, Amr, Alex, and Jared, but it was still almost 3 hours because we had a whole lot to talk about. And I always enjoy talking about movies, TV, and other sort of media with everybody that joins the feedback circle here. Thank you to all of you that sent in feedback this week as we get closer and closer to Superman and as we begin Jurassic Week here with Jurassic World Rebirth coming out at the end of this particular week. If you want to join the feedback circle, if you have any thoughts that you want to contribute with respect to movies, TV, and other assorted media, which should include Jurassic World Rebirth spoilers for our next episode of Flight Chat, because I should have seen it by then. You know where to find me on Threads and on Instagram at the Flightcast, on BLUESKY at Flightcast. You can comment on the posting for this particular episode on the Flightcast YouTube page. There's the Flightcast Facebook page, and of course I can be reached by email at ray@theflightcast.com. All right, take care, stay safe out there, have a great week, and I will see you all next time. Take it easy.